Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this What If story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by Bronze Shark 488 on Wattpad. Now let's start. It started with a glowing baby being born somewhere in China. Doctors were baffled by this phenomenon, not understanding how it was possible, but the glowing baby was just the beginning. After that first report of a child born with a strange ability, more reports came in from other corners of the world about similar occurrences. With these children being born with unique abilities, what was once thought impossible became the new possible. This would change the world, as over the years, more and more children would be born with these abilities, eventually known as quirks. The population would eventually consist of 80% quirked individuals, while the remaining 20% would be those without a quirk, known as the quirkless. This transformation occurred after multiple generations and various restructuring of society in all countries. However, a significant problem arose. Those with quirks began using them for various crimes and malicious acts. The solution was to create a new profession, the profession of heroics. Heroes and heroines would risk their lives to protect the innocent and keep the civilian population safe from villains. While this is the world being explored, the focus is on one person in particular. It was a morning like any other in Mizudafu, where two individuals were waiting in a doctor's office. A slim woman with green hair pulled up in a bun, wearing a pink cardigan and blue skirt, sat beside a small child with messy curly green hair, diamond freckles on his cheeks, dressed in a yellow shirt and blue shorts. This was 𝐒𝐬𝐬 Midoriya and her 8-year-old son, Izuku Midoriya. They were waiting for some test results when the doctor eventually entered the room, papers in hand. This doctor had a bushy red beard and wore sunglasses over his eyes. He was Dr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 asked Dr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 about the results of the tests, holding her son closer to herself. Dr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 informed her that he had both good news and bad news, prompting 𝐒𝐬𝐬 to request the good news first, though she felt anxious about the bad news. He explained that the good news was that young Izuku did have a quirk, as indicated by the test results. He showed an X-ray of Izuku's feet, noting the extra pinky toe joint, which typically suggested quirklessness, but the BLD test results revealed a partially active quirk factor. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 tilted her head in confusion, while Izuku, smiling at the news, mimicked his mother's gesture. Dr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 elaborated that the bad news was that while fully active quirk factors are easier to determine, there is less research on partially active quirk factors. He mentioned that most partially active quirks are in a gathering phase. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 inquired about what that meant for Izuku, and Dr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 explained that he might need more nutrition, calories, proteins, and vitamins in general. He then asked 𝐒𝐬𝐬 when Izuku last used the bathroom. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 looked puzzled for a moment before focusing her attention on Izuku, asking him if he had used the bathroom recently. Izuku replied that he hadn't felt the need to go all week, except for brushing his teeth and bath time. Dr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 snapped his fingers to regain their attention, explaining that Izuku's quirk, in its partially active state, was likely collecting and transforming everything he ate into what he needed for when his quirk was ready to fully activate. Izuku's eyes lit up with excitement as he realized he might not need to use the toilet until his quirk fully developed. Dr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 chuckled and mentioned that even after Izuku's quirk became fully active, he might still not need to use the toilet. He then shifted to discuss potential issues, emphasizing that unless Izuku's body was highly efficient in utilizing everything he consumed, it would be essential for them to return in a few weeks for a checkup. He recommended increasing Izuku's portion sizes significantly to ensure he received enough nutrition for his growing body and his quirk's needs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 expressed her gratitude to Dr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬, bowing slightly, with Izuku happily mirroring her gesture. Before Dr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 could respond, Izuku asked when his quirk would be fully active. Dr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 explained that it could take anywhere from a few days to a few years, but reminded him that his quirk was already halfway there. He encouraged Izuku to eat everything his mother provided to ensure he received everything necessary for full activation, patting him on the head, which elicited a giggle from Izuku. Dr. Colden handed 𝐒𝐬𝐬 copies of the test results and a note for the quirk registration office regarding Izuku's undetermined quirk status. The Midoriya family then left the doctor's office to head home, where 𝐒𝐬𝐬 prepared an extra-large serving of Izuku's favorite food, katsudon, which he devoured enthusiastically, finishing 3 servings before feeling close to full. The next day after Izuku's doctor's appointment, he arrived at school and hurriedly ran toward his best friend, Katsuki Bakugo, who had ash blonde hair and red eyes, dressed in their preschool outfit. Izuku called out to him, nearly tripping as he ran. Bakugo, with a small glare, asked if Izuku's quirk had finally manifested. Izuku hesitated, tilting his head and resting his hand on his chin, before admitting that it had not entirely come in yet. The other kids around Bakugo looked confused at this response. Bakugo narrowed his eyes, demanding to know what Izuku meant by not entirely. Izuku explained that his doctor had said his quirk was only partially active because it was in a gathering phase. Bakugo seemed skeptical, but the other children remained puzzled. Before anyone could respond, Bakugo unleashed a small explosion, catching Izuku off guard and sending him to the ground with a singe mark on his face. Tears welled up in Izuku's eyes as he looked up at Bakugo. Bakugo, with a dismissive tone, accused Izuku of lying, insisting that everyone knew one either had a quirk or did not. He declared that Izuku must be quirkless, just as they had all thought before. With that, Bakugo turned and stormed off, leaving the other children to laugh and follow him, spreading the rumor of Izuku's supposed quirklessness. Izuku sat there for a moment, crying, before getting up and heading to class. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 had informed the school and provided a note from the quirk doctor explaining that Izuku needed to eat more than normal for his quirk to fully develop. During lunch, he was taken to a separate area to eat the larger meals his mother had packed. While some teachers initially believed he was quirkless, many changed their minds after witnessing the amount he could eat. When it was time to play outside, no one wanted to be near him. Whenever someone approached, it was often to mock him. Despite his attempts to explain that he did have a quirk, the other children refused to believe him. This bullying continued for several years, escalating from verbal taunts to more physical confrontations. Although most teachers believed he had a quirk, they provided little support beyond allowing him a safe space to eat. 7 years later, a now 15-year-old Izuku was heading to a new high school. 2 weeks prior, at the start of the school year at Aldra High, he had left the safety of the janitor's closet, where he often ate his large lunches. In his younger years, he had eaten in the teacher's lounge, but since many teachers disliked him, he was told to use the janitor's closet instead. Fortunately, the janitor was a decent person who spoke with Izuku when they were both there. Izuku's quirk still had not fully activated, but his last checkup indicated he was very close. Unfortunately, the bullying had intensified since his childhood, and with most teachers against him for reasons he could not understand, his life felt like a living nightmare. On this day, he simply wanted to get through school, though he had forgotten to bring the newly added portion of his lunch that his mother and doctor believed he needed. Frustrated, he decided to go outside and find a quiet spot to enjoy the pleasant weather. However, as soon as he stepped outside, he was grabbed by Bakugo and his friends, who pushed him down in the middle of the courtyard. Bakugo taunted him, saying he had finally emerged from his little cave, as the sound of explosions popped in his palms. Other teens turned to watch, drawn by Bakugo's voice and the sounds of his quirk. Izuku looked up at Bakugo, fear evident in his eyes. He stammered that he just wanted to enjoy the nice weather, nervously scratching the back of his head and searching for a way out. Bakugo, noticing Izuku's unease, decided to escalate the situation further, suggesting that Izuku help make the day a bit nicer for everyone. This led to Izuku being caught off guard by an explosion before he could respond. Bakugo wasn't alone in this. A few of his friends joined in, kicking and punching Izuku while others used their quirks against him. This continued for several minutes until a scream echoed from near the front entrance, accompanied by the sound of clattering containers. Most students turned their attention to the commotion, but Bakugo and his group remained focused on Izuku. Suddenly, they felt a strange sensation in their hair, as if it were about to be pulled from their heads. When Bakugo looked up, his face went pale at the sight of 𝐒𝐬𝐬 Midoriya, her arm outstretched and a green glow surrounding her hand that matched the glow around the boy's hair. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 approached them and addressed Bakugo in a low, calm tone, barely concealing her anger. She asked him what he and the others were doing to her son. Bakugo, though terrified, would never admit to it. He stammered an explanation, but 𝐒𝐮𝐬 cut him off with a sharp slap. She warned him that she would be discussing this with Mitsuki later, but for now, she leaned in closer, ensuring all the teens could hear her. She ominously stated that if any of them came near her son again, they would find that hair wasn't the only small object in the human body. This caused the bullies to stiffen in fear before 𝐒𝐮𝐬 released her grip on their hair. She then rushed to her son, helping him to his feet and taking him to the hospital for treatment. The school attempted to deny any wrongdoing, but the janitor had recorded everything on his phone and provided the footage to the police. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 invited him over for a homemade meal as a thank you for his kindness to Izuku. Fast forward to the present, where Izuku stood outside a classroom door at a new school. This institution was a bit farther from home, but it had a strict zero-tolerance policy on bullying and quirk discrimination. Izuku felt a mix of emotions. His mother had insisted he attend therapy since he still believed Bakugo could be a good person and a great hero in the future. She had told him that Bakugo's actions made him more of a villain than a hero and certainly not a friend. The therapist was decent, but the sessions felt slow, and he had only been attending for half a week, so it was hard to tell how effective they would be. When his name was called to enter and introduce himself, Izuku took a deep breath, trying to quell his anxiety and project confidence as he walked into his new classroom. However, his forced confidence wavered when he noticed everyone staring at him. He felt like he might tremble but managed to suppress it enough to offer a shaky smile. The teacher, Ms. Yuta, introduced him to the class, giving him space to speak. Izuku calmed down enough to think he would only stutter a little during his introduction. He introduced himself, mentioning his interest in quirk analysis and trying new foods, and concluded with a polite bow, asking his classmates to take care of him. Ms. Yuta encouraged the students to ask questions, and hands shot up, catching Izuku off guard. The teacher pointed to one student, who asked about his quirk. Izuku had anticipated this question but hoped to answer it once his quirk was fully activated. He explained that he didn't know much about his quirk yet, which elicited confused looks and murmurs from the class until the teacher quieted them. He continued, sharing that his quirk was only partially active according to his doctor, who had said it would activate soon based on his last tests. The class buzzed again, but the teacher quickly silenced them. More hands went up, and Ms. Yuta selected another student to ask. The girl inquired about what he meant by partially active. Izuku explained that his quirk involved storing and transforming what he ate into something usable when it fully activated, which required him to eat about 6 times the normal amount. He scratched the back of his head, his stutter subsiding as he spoke about his quirk. The class began to stir again, but the teacher intervened before turning to Izuku, instructing him to take a seat in the back corner next to Azui and Mongoose, who raised their hands to indicate their location. Izuku felt a wave of nervousness wash over him at the prospect of sitting next to 2 girls, especially since he had little experience interacting with them. He quickly bowed to his teacher and made his way to his desk, unpacking his stationery for the first class. The day unfolded like any other, with Izuku gradually relaxing as he noticed no one attempting to bully him. Eventually, the lunch bell rang, and the teacher left the room as everyone stood up to head to lunch. Izuku was packing his bag and was about to head to the teacher's lounge to grab his lunch when one of his seat neighbors stopped him. Azui tilted her head, her finger resting on her chin, and asked if he would like to eat lunch with them. Caught off guard by the invitation, Izuku quickly shook off his confusion, reminding himself that this new school, along with its students and teachers, was supposed to be nicer than his previous ones. He agreed, explaining that he just needed to grab his lunch from the teacher's lounge. Azui nodded and mentioned that she and her friend usually ate on the roof on sunny days like this. Izuku agreed to meet them there before rushing off to get his food. After a short time, Izuku pushed open the door to the school roof, carrying a tower of 7 large bento boxes and 2 thermoses clipped to his backpack. Once outside, he set down the bento tower to look for the girl who had invited him and her friend. He quickly spotted 2 people waving to him in the sunniest corner of the roof. One was 𝐒𝐬, the girl with darker green hair and big round black eyes. Izuku had speculated that she might have a mutation quirk of some kind, but he managed to keep his thoughts in check, remembering what his therapist had advised about controlling his mumbling and staying aware of his surroundings. The second occupant of the rooftop had red, puffed-out hair and yellow, slitted eyes, with a snake-like neck. While Izuku felt somewhat unnerved by her appearance, he reminded himself that 𝐒𝐬𝐽 was scarier, even if he still believed 𝐒𝐬𝐽 could be a good hero in the future. Shaking off his need to analyze, he picked up his tower of bento and walked closer to the two girls, who had noticeably smaller bentos next to them. He sat down. He noticed both girls looking at his tower of bentos, prompting a nervous laugh from him that caught their attention. He explained that he needed to eat more than usual, scratching the back of his head and looking away. The two girls exchanged glances before turning back to him as he opened the top bento. 𝐒𝐬 introduced herself as Tsuyu, but she preferred to be called Tsu. Izuku looked at them while he searched for his chopsticks, not wanting to seem rude. After Tsu finished speaking, the snake girl introduced herself as Mongoose Habuko, expressing her pleasure in meeting him. Izuku smiled back, sensing their friendly demeanor. The three of them then expressed their gratitude for the food and began to eat while chatting and getting to know one another. As they talked, Izuku gradually relaxed, becoming more comfortable and stuttering less. When he started on his last bento, Tsu asked him where he planned to go for university, causing him to flinch slightly. Before they could comment on it, he spoke up, saying he was planning on 𝐸 for the hero course. He took a calming breath before adding that he was specifically interested in the hero course. Mongoose responded excitedly, sharing that she and Tsu also wanted to get into 𝐸's hero course, although she was also trying out for another hero course as well. Izuku expressed his determination to get in, mentioning that he had been working out and taking martial arts classes since his quirk doctor advised him that being fit would help his quirk activate faster. He laughed, noting that he had been training for 5 years since he was 10. Tsu, tilting her head and poking her cheek, asked if he knew anything about his quirk beyond needing more food. Izuku and Mongoose both thought she was cute, but Izuku quickly refocused, feeling embarrassed about the other aspect of his quirk. He hesitated, saying there was another part he would rather not discuss, as he found it awkward. He looked away, finishing the rest of his bento quickly. The girls exchanged glances before shrugging it off. A few minutes later, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch and sending the trio back to their classes. After the final bell of the day rang, the three friends left the school grounds, walking home in the girls' case, while Izuku headed to the nearest train station for a short 30-minute ride. Since Tsu and Mongoose lived in the direction of the train station, Izuku was able to walk with his friends for a while, giving them more time to talk. Izuku quietly noted to himself that there weren't as many villain attacks around here, but his two friends heard him. Tsu asked what he meant by that, and Izuku explained that on his way to and from his old school, he would typically see at least one villain attack on the way to school and another two on the way home. As he spoke, he didn't notice the looks of disbelief and slight concern on his friends' faces until Mongoose grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him while exclaiming that it was shocking to hear he would normally see villain attacks on his way to school. Izuku stammered that it was normal where he lived, and Tsu interrupted Mongoose to let Izuku speak normally. He explained that having 3 villain attacks in a day was actually a good day for him. Noticing their silence, he guessed that his friends were worried. Tsu bluntly stated that it wasn't normal, and Izuku looked at her with confusion. She continued, explaining that while they did have villain attacks, there were at most 2 a week, and they were spread out over days, not hours. Izuku stared at Tsu in shock before looking at Mongoose, who nodded in agreement. Their walk home and to the train station shifted into Izuku sharing stories of the various hero and villain fights he had witnessed, bringing up different articles the news had written about them to show them photos. Meanwhile, the girls felt increasingly worried for their new friend, especially since he mentioned that he sometimes went looking for these events. Mongoose and Tsu decided that if they ever visited where Izuku lived, they would take extra precautions to stay away from any hero and villain fights. A few months had passed since Izuku transferred to his new school and met Tsu and Mongoose, his 2 best friends. They were his only friends, but that made them the best. It turned out that 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐬 had only each other as friends before Izuku showed up. Others found 𝐒𝐮𝐬 intimidating, and since no one bullied or bothered her, they simply stayed away, which meant no one was violating the school policy against quirk discrimination. 𝐒𝐮, on the other hand, couldn't stay long after school to make friends because she had to help take care of her younger siblings, which made other teens think she was antisocial. Additionally, her stoic expression often kept others from befriending her. Izuku was seen one day mumbling and writing in his quirk analysis notebook, which made everyone else uncomfortable, except for 𝐒𝐮 and 𝐒𝐮𝐬, who sat next to him. This essentially labeled them as the outcast group of the school. The trio didn't mind being left to themselves, although Izuku initially blamed himself for the other two being ignored by their classmates. It took 𝐒𝐮 and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 several hours of texting and phone calls to convince Izuku that he wasn't the cause of their group being overlooked. During these months, Izuku felt comfortable enough to show his quirk analysis to his friends. While 𝐒𝐮 bluntly commented that it was creepy, both girls acknowledged that it would be helpful when they all became heroes, which reassured Izuku. He had also met both girls' families during this time. The first meeting occurred when 𝐒𝐮 asked for both 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and Izuku to help take care of her siblings while they worked on a school project together. When Izuku met Samidare and Satsuki, he could see how much they cared for their big sister, as they immediately hugged her upon entering the house. That day was spent with Izuku and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 distracting the two kids while 𝐒𝐮 prepared dinner. Afterward, Izuku helped clean the dishes while 𝐒𝐮𝐬 assisted 𝐒𝐮 in getting the kids to sleep. They then worked on the project until 𝐒𝐮's parents came home. 𝐒𝐮's mother, Belle, was happy to meet her daughter's friends, while her father, Ganma, stared down Izuku, making him nervous. After some time, Izuku and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 needed to leave to head home, leading to the second meeting with the families. Izuku insisted on walking 𝐒𝐮𝐬 home, even if it meant going past the train station. Once they arrived at her house, Izuku came face to face with Mia, 𝐒𝐮𝐬's mother. Habuko quickly diffused any tension by reminding her mother of the text she had sent explaining what she was doing that evening. Mia invited Izuku in for a bit to get to know one of her daughter's friends. After a pleasant conversation, Mia brought out a photo album and began showing baby pictures of Habuko to Izuku. Embarrassed, Habuko reminded Izuku that he needed to get to the train station before he missed the last train home. Realizing the time, Izuku quickly thanked Mia for her hospitality and rushed to the train station. This left Habuko alone with her mother, who proceeded to tease her about the boy she had just brought home. Habuko blushed, her scales barely concealing her embarrassment. She tried to explain to her mother that she and Izuku were just friends, but Mia continued to smirk, letting her daughter rant until she finally spoke after Habuko had exhausted herself. Mia smiled and said that they were just not like that. This prompted another rant from Habuko, causing her mother to laugh. Once Habuko was alone in her room, she began to reflect on her mother's words and the time she had spent with Izuku over the months, causing her blush to deepen as she buried her face in her pillow. In her thoughts, she called Izuku a fool. It was another day after school for the group of friends, and it turned out to be quite surprising since 𝐒𝐮 didn't need to head home immediately. Her parents had some time off from work. This left the three with an opportunity to spend more time together, and they were currently walking toward the more populated areas of their school district. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 was trying to convince the others to go to a bowling alley, suggesting it would be fun and even proposing a bet to make things more exciting. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 had an impish or perhaps smug look on her face, and Izuku had been working hard to read his friend's facial expressions better, hoping to engage in more meaningful conversations without pausing to figure out if they were joking or serious. He felt he had improved significantly in this regard compared to a few months ago. 𝐒𝐮, tilting her head and resting her finger on her cheek, asked what kind of bet they were talking about. This made both Izuku and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 think she was adorable. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 snapped her fingers and declared that the loser would buy dinner for the other two. Izuku hesitated, admitting he had never played bowling before, although he was interested in the game. He was just reluctant about the bet. 𝐒𝐮 offered to teach him for a round before they played for the bet, and after some thought, Izuku agreed to the plan. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 pumped her fist in excitement, and the three of them headed toward the bowling alley. As they approached the entrance, an explosion erupted from inside the building, sending them and nearby civilians flying back. Fortunately, The most they suffered were minor scrapes and small cuts. Izuku was the first to recover and quickly helped Tsu to her feet, asking if she was okay. She nodded, and they began searching for Mongoose. Just then, another explosion echoed, and they turned to see their friend in distress, a piece of metal embedded in her side as she cried out in pain. Earlier that day had been fairly standard for Habuko, even with her mother teasing her about Midoriya. She felt a surge of joy when Tsu announced she didn't have to take care of her siblings that day. After school, the three friends called their parents to inform them they would be home later than usual because they planned to hang out. Habuko's mother, Mia, couldn't resist teasing her. Mia remarked that Habuko was going to hang out with her boyfriend, which made Habuko protest that he was not her boyfriend and that Tsu would be there too. This only elicited laughter from Mia, who continued to tease her about going after both of them. Habuko felt embarrassed but quickly replied that it wasn't like that and asked her mother not to say anything more. After some playful banter, Mia reminded her to have fun and be home before 10. Once the calls ended, the trio made their way to the bustling area of the city filled with restaurants and arcades. Habuko pondered what they should do and decided to suggest bowling. She presented her idea with a confident look, knowing that Midoriya was trying to read her and Tsu's expressions to gauge their feelings. Tsu, with her head tilted and finger on her cheek, asked what kind of bet they could make. Habuko snapped her fingers and proposed that the loser would buy dinner for the other two. Midoriya hesitated, admitting he had never bowled before, but Tsu reassured him that they could teach him for a round before the bet. After considering it, Midoriya agreed, and Habuko celebrated with a small fist pump as they headed to the bowling alley. When they arrived, Midoriya opened the door for them, but just then, an explosion occurred. Habuko was thrown back, landing away from her friends. As she got to her feet, she heard another explosion followed by a crashing sound. Looking up, she saw a piece of metal hurtling toward her at an alarming speed, and before she could react, it pierced her side, causing her to cry out in pain. Izuku and Tsu watched in horror as their friend was injured. Izuku's mind raced as he tried to think of what to do, moving instinctively toward Habuko's side, with Tsu right behind him. They scanned the area, noticing that some heroes were engaged in a battle against whoever was causing the explosions inside the bowling alley. Izuku quickly recalled the first aid knowledge he had gained from patching himself up after encounters with bullies at school. He focused on Mongoose's injury, asking her to stay with them as he examined her wound. Mongoose responded with a weak nod. Tsu had already taken out her phone to call for an ambulance. As Izuku carefully tore Mongoose's shirt to get a better look at her injury, he wished he could do more to help his friend. When he finally saw the wound, a strange sensation coursed through his body, followed by a slimy, goopy feeling. Before he could dwell on it, an instinctive urge compelled him to place his hand over Mongoose's injury. As he reached out, the slimy sensation intensified in his hand. Upon contact, his hand transformed into a green and black goo-like substance that spread over Mongoose's injury and the metal piece embedded in her side. Mongoose gasped as the goo entered her wound and began to extract the metal. Along with the sensation of the metal being removed, she felt a warmth enveloping her injury, soothing the pain. Tsu turned back at the sound of Mongoose's gasp and was taken aback by the sight of the goo emanating from Izuku's hand. Before she could react, the metal was removed, and the goo retracted back to Izuku until his hand returned to normal. Izuku stared at his hand in disbelief, while Tsu and Mongoose looked at Mongoose's side, which now bore no trace of the injury. Before Izuku could process what had happened, Mongoose hugged him tightly, repeatedly thanking him as she cried. Tsu quickly joined the embrace, rubbing Mongoose's back as she wept. It took a moment for Izuku to gather his thoughts, but when he did, he returned the hug, comforting her and assuring her that he was there for her. Their moment of relief was suddenly interrupted by a shadow looming over them. Izuku sensed something was wrong, a feeling reminiscent of when Bakugo would target him at Aldra, but this was far more intense. He turned around quickly, raising his arms just as a glowing fist descended toward him and his friends. Mongoose had screamed for what felt like an eternity until she found herself lying down with her friends beside her. She could see Midoriya examining her side, which was pierced by a piece of metal, and she heard his faint voice. Looking over at Tsu, who was turned away with her phone, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 realized she must be calling for help. Midoriya's voice pulled her focus back to him as he reassured her, asking her to stay with them while he assessed her injury. Feeling weak, she nodded, trying to concentrate on her friends, but her consciousness began to fade. Just before she lost awareness, she felt a slimy sensation spread across her side, followed by the warmth that chased away her pain. When she regained her senses, she saw Midoriya's hand transforming back to normal as he withdrew it from her side. To her amazement, the pain was gone, and there was no scar where the metal had pierced her. It took her a moment to comprehend what had happened. Izuku had somehow healed her. Overwhelmed with gratitude, she hugged him tightly, crying and thanking him repeatedly. Tsu joined in, rubbing her back, and Izuku wrapped his arms around them both, whispering his support. Their moment of comfort was shattered when a shadow fell over them. Izuku stiffened, instinctively pushing 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and Tsu back as he spun around, raising his arms just as a glowing fist came crashing down. A blast of light and dust erupted, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 felt Tsu pull her back to her feet as they stared at the spot where their friend had been. Izuku had pushed his friends away, spinning to face the incoming attack. He thought only of protecting them as explosions echoed around him. He felt that same instinct again, but this time it felt different. Instead of the usual slimy warmth, this sensation was tougher. Without hesitation, he let that feeling flow through his arms, hoping to shield his friends from harm. His arms shifted and changed, transforming into something that felt unfamiliar yet was undeniably his own. Before Izuku could think any further, the villain finally landed his hit. A bright light flashed, accompanied by a sound that resembled an explosion, but he felt no heat from it. The noise was so loud that it drowned out everything else happening around him. As the dust settled, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and Tsu could finally see their friend. To their surprise, as Izuku looked up from the ground, he noticed that his arms had transformed. Instead of arms, he had two goo-like appendages that fused together to create a giant shield in front of him and his friends. Confused by what he was seeing, Izuku lost concentration, causing the shield to split apart and the goo-like appendages to reform into his arms. He stared at his arms in bewilderment for a moment before everything clicked into place. His quirk was fully active. He would have cheered with joy if he hadn't been pulled back by another slimy appendage. Fortunately, Tsu had used her tongue to grab him and pull him back to her and 𝐒𝐮𝐬's location just as the villain attempted to attack again. Tsu reminded Izuku that while he might be happy about his quirk activating, it wasn't the time to get distracted. Embarrassed, Izuku nodded, his cheeks turning red. Before any of them could say anything else, the villain turned toward them, preparing to launch another explosive attack. However, before he could strike, wooden tendrils wrapped around him. The three teens looked up to see 𝐒𝐬 standing on top of a lamppost, his arms extended to create the wooden tendrils. Another hero, 𝐒𝐮𝐬, quickly arrived and placed quirk-suppressing cuffs on the villain. After restraining the threat, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 approached the trio to check on them. He asked if they were okay and if anyone had been hurt. Izuku sighed with relief along with his friends, but soon felt a wave of fatigue and hunger wash over him. Tsu was the first to speak up, noting that while they were fine, her friends might need to see a doctor. Izuku and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 exchanged confused glances, but Tsu explained that Habuko had a piece of metal stuck in her side earlier, and Izuku's quirk had activated for the first time when he healed her and blocked one of the villain's attacks. As Tsu detailed the events to 𝐒𝐮𝐬, Izuku and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 realized they had completely forgotten about needing medical attention. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 was surprised to learn that Izuku's quirk had manifested in his teens and began checking 𝐒𝐮𝐬's side. Izuku explained that his quirk had only been partially active before, and now that it had fully activated, he needed to see his quirk doctor. Once 𝐒𝐮𝐬 finished checking 𝐒𝐮𝐬, Izuku asked if he could have his autograph. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 agreed and signed for him, Tsu, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 before leading them to an ambulance for a checkup by medical professionals. After being examined, the three friends were cleared to leave and agreed to head home. The next day, Izuku and his mom were at his quirk doctor's office. Inko had preferred that Izuku went to the hospital the day before, but he managed to convince her that waiting a day for a checkup and to learn about his quirk was the better option. He knew that his friend Habuko was not as fortunate, having been taken to the doctor immediately after he and Tsu walked her home. This was why he now referred to her as Habuko instead of Mongoose, and he would continue to blush whenever he thought of their walk home. Flashback. The three friends were on their way to Habuko's home, as Izuku and Tsu insisted on walking her there after she had been injured, even if she was healed now. Habuko caught Izuku's attention, asking if he could call her Habuko from now on. She looked away, crossing her arms, leaving Izuku blushing since a girl wanted him to call her by name. He had been calling Tsu by a nickname, but that was more because he felt he had no choice in the matter. Quickly shaking off his embarrassment, he responded to Habuko, agreeing that she could call him Izuku. End of flashback. Now, in one of the doctor's office patient rooms, the Midoriya family awaited test results, specifically BLD tests, and one that involved analyzing the goo Izuku had transformed his arms into. He felt strange about them taking what felt like a piece of himself and mentioned he could still feel the part that was taken. He was assured he would get it back and to inform them if he felt any discomfort. The door opened, and Dr. Colden entered the room with a stack of papers. He greeted the Midoriyas cheerfully, ready to reveal what Izuku's quirk was. Inko expressed her excitement to learn about her son's quirk, while Izuku felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Izuku felt a mix of nervousness and curiosity as he considered his quirk. He wanted to learn more, but something felt off, as if a part of him was misplaced. Dr. Colden presented a vial containing a goo-like substance that began to move as it got closer to Izuku. Dr. Colden explained that this was the first point he wanted to address. He handed the vial to Izuku, who opened it and allowed the piece of himself to absorb into his body. Dr. Colden continued, explaining that after conducting tests on the sample, they determined it was not only a part of Izuku but also something his body had been storing for a while. The explanation left both Izuku and his mother looking confused, which Dr. Colden noticed. He elaborated, stating that the goo was produced by Izuku and that he could essentially transform any part of his body into it. This revelation shocked both Midoriyas. Dr. Colden expressed his longing to conduct further tests, encouraging Izuku to transform more of his body while wearing a specialized device that would help identify any issues during the transformation, as well as conduct additional tests related to Izuku's initial use of his quirk. Excited by the prospect of testing his quirk, Izuku quickly stood up, followed by his mother, who was more subdued, recalling the incident that had triggered her son's quirk activation. Dr. Colden led them to a quirk testing area to explore the second aspect of Izuku's abilities. Izuku was fitted with a chest 𝐒𝐻𝐬 that featured a strange metal disc at its center, connected by wires and pads to various parts of his body. He was instructed to recreate the shield he had formed previously, which he eventually managed to do after several attempts. It took him remembering his longing to protect his friends that finally allowed him to create the shield on his 9th try. Although the shield was smaller than the one he had made before, it was still large enough to cover him completely from the front. The device on his chest beeped continuously throughout the test as he transformed his arms, legs, and other body parts, but he was always halted before he could fully transform into goo. After completing his last test, Izuku was informed that he would learn why they had prevented him from fully transforming. A few nurses who had sustained injuries were brought in, and Izuku was asked to heal them. Their injuries were not as severe as Habuko's from the previous day, but he still endeavored to heal them. He succeeded on his 7th attempt with a nurse who had a dove mutation quirk. However, when he moved on to the next nurse, he felt a strange sensation, almost like static, coursing up his arm from where he was touching her injury. Once he finished healing, he focused on the static feeling, and his hand began to glow with a blue light, small sparks dancing off it, which elicited a gasp from the nurse he had just healed. The second nurse revealed that the glow was her quirk, which mirrored the blue light and sparks emanating from Izuku's hand. Dr. Colden noted this observation for further testing, which meant more time spent healing others and experimenting with the amount of goo used during the healing process to determine its effects on his ability to copy their quirks. One of the tests showed that the nurse's quirk was actually stronger than usual while Izuku was healing her. Eventually, the test concluded, but by the end, Izuku found he could not activate any of the quirks he had copied during the healing process. Dr. Colden classified Izuku's quirk as a transformation/emitter hybrid with 4 subtypes: healing, copying, enhancer, and creation. As he documented this, Inko felt overwhelmed, while Izuku was happy yet puzzled about why he had not been allowed to fully transform. Curious, Izuku asked Dr. Colden why he had been restricted from fully transforming earlier. The question caught the attention of both adults. Dr. Colden cleared his throat before responding, explaining that the device had indicated that if Izuku fully transformed, he might not be able to revert back. This revelation caused concern for both Izuku and his mother, but Dr. Colden quickly reassured them, suggesting it was likely a matter of control. He encouraged Izuku to practice more to gain better mastery over his quirk before attempting a full transformation. Feeling reassured, Izuku and his mother continued discussing his quirk until they left. That night, the Midoriya household celebrated, inviting both the Azui and Mongoose families to join in the festivities. Name: Midoriya Izuku. Hero name, not applicable quirk. Bio-goo description: Bio-goo is the name given to my quirk, which I can change once I understand it better. It refers to the goo-like substance my body creates, which can transform into various forms. This goo is composed of biological components from my body, as well as the things I have consumed over the years. It has been transformed by my quirk and stored as part of me, which is why my body can convert it back into goo. Although it remains unclear how I can accumulate this bio-goo without gaining weight over the years, it is an integral part of my abilities. Warnings: my doctor advised against fully transforming into bio-goo, as it is uncertain whether I could revert back to my original form if I did so. Though he mentioned it might be a control issue that he would need to work on, Izuku had discovered the first use of his bio-goo: healing. He learned that he could naturally heal by using some of the excess bio-goo within him to replace damaged areas with new, healthy parts of his body. If it was just a bruise, the goo stimulated his natural healing process to work faster. When he healed Habuko for the first time using his quirk, it not only enhanced her body's natural healing but also transformed some of the bio-goo into new cells and body parts, completely replacing the damaged ones and leaving no scars behind. The second use of the bio-goo allowed him to reshape his transformed body parts, hardening and softening them at will. For example, he created a shield to protect himself and his friends. He still needed to work on developing more forms for future use, but he had a few ideas in mind, and both Habuko and Tsu had offered to help him brainstorm. The third use of the bio-goo was its copying ability, which functioned based on the amount of goo that covered a portion of someone where their quirk originated. A nurse he had healed provided a good example. He had healed her hand, which was where her quirk was activated. If he had healed her shoulder, he wouldn't have copied her quirk. However, when he healed someone with a mutation quirk afterward, it felt like his quirk was trying to copy it but couldn't for some reason. This was something he planned to test later, but he knew he needed more control over his quirk before practicing with others' abilities. The fourth use of the bio-goo was straightforward. Although he couldn't use it himself, it was beneficial for others. He could enhance the quirks of others as long as his bio-goo was covering the part of their body they used to control their quirk. Currently, it seemed to provide a 3 to 4 times boost in strength to whoever's quirk he enhanced. This also required more testing, but he felt he should be able to enhance more than just quirks, which would have to wait until he gained more control over his abilities. A few days had passed since Izuku's quirk had fully activated. Although he remained an outcast at school, he had become surprisingly, and much to his dismay, the topic of conversation among his classmates. It wasn't that he disliked the more positive interactions, rather, he was bothered by how many classmates who had previously ignored him and his friends were now trying to persuade him to join their groups, leaving behind the 2 friends who had stood by him during his struggles. Being the nice guy he was, Izuku stuttered and mumbled his way out of those situations as politely as he could. He had no idea how they found out about his quirk activation, especially since he and his friends had been caught up in a villain attack, or how they knew he had unintentionally stalled the villain until the heroes could capture him. Tsu suggested that some classmates had been nearby and witnessed his actions. Izuku honestly didn't care how it happened. He just wanted to return to the days when he and his friends were ignored, allowing them to hang out without disturbance. Habuko had mentioned that they were less likely to approach when the 3 of them were together, which had only been true for the first 2 days. Regardless, they managed to find a more secluded area to spend their lunch breaks, leading to their current discussion. Izuku proposed that they start training for the entrance exam for 𝐒𝐮𝐬. He explained that since he could finally use his quirk, he needed to train it anyway, and they might as well prepare for 𝐒𝐮𝐬 together. He suggested that the three of them could help each other practice and do regular exercises to stay in shape for the exam. His friends looked at him with blank expressions, prompting him to guess their thoughts, which was a challenge for him. He assumed they wanted him to elaborate, so he continued, stating that they had 3 years to prepare and learn. However, Tsu and Habuko exchanged glances, still maintaining their blank expressions, causing Izuku's eye to twitch in frustration. He accused them of teasing him, which made them burst into laughter. Izuku felt deflated but soon joined in their giggles. Once the laughter subsided, Habuko spoke up, apologizing for their playful joke. She expressed her willingness to train for the exam, mentioning that she had already been doing some light workouts, but questioned if it was too early for intense training. Tsu chimed in, suggesting that it would be fun and they could also study together to improve their grades for the written part of the entrance exam. Habuko appeared thoughtful for a moment before voicing her concerns about passing the practical exam. Seeing her downcast expression, Izuku and Tsu moved closer to comfort her. Izuku reassured her that she would pass the exam, emphasizing that they had 3 years to prepare and learn together. He hugged her, supported by Tsu, who joined in the comforting gesture. Habuko hugged her friends tightly as they reassured her that she would do fine. Izuku expressed his confidence, stating that they would all do great as long as they supported each other. He noticed Habuko's grip tighten, sensing that the upcoming exam wasn't the only thing on her mind. Since the bowling alley incident, Habuko had seemed a bit off, and both Izuku and Tsu were determined to be there for her. Fortunately, she had shown signs of improvement over the past few days, but her lack of confidence still concerned them. After a moment of embracing, they began planning their training and study schedule for the 𝐒𝐮𝐬 entrance exam, fully aware of the challenges ahead but committed to attending 𝐒𝐮𝐬 together. Years later, Izuku, Tsu, and Habuko found themselves in their final year of high school, eagerly waiting for class to end so they could escape their classmates. Their homeroom teacher entered with a stack of papers, announcing that they needed to complete career forms to help them decide their futures. The teacher's enthusiasm about their aspirations to become heroes sparked excitement in the class, causing most students to use their quirks, except for Izuku, Tsu, and Habuko. The teacher quickly reminded the class to refrain from using their quirks inappropriately. After explaining the requirements for the forms, the trio wasted no time escaping the classroom and the school building. Izuku remarked that their teacher reminded him of someone from 𝐒𝐻, expressing his frustration with a sigh. Tsu pondered whether to involve her parents, who were lawyers, in the situation, while Habuko pointed out that it might not make a difference. She turned to Izuku for his thoughts, and he expressed his hope that there wouldn't be anyone like their teacher at 𝐒𝐮𝐬. He suggested they check the 𝐒𝐮𝐬 website to see if there was a way for them to support each other during the practical exam. Habuko questioned whether there was a way to do that, but her friends suddenly stopped, prompting her to turn back. Izuku was already on his phone, and Tsu was doing the same. Habuko playfully flicked Tsu on the forehead to get her attention, then tried the same with Izuku, but when that didn't work, she grabbed his hand and blushed, dragging him along. As they made their way to the train, Habuko urged them to hurry, reminding them not to get distracted by trying to find loopholes in the exam rules. Later, the three friends were at Takoba Municipal Beach Park, their training ground, which they had been cleaning up while training their quirks. After 2 hours of hard work, they took a break and returned to their earlier conversation. Izuku excitedly shared that he had found information about requesting specialized support gear for the exam, which could help them use their quirks effectively. Habuko inquired if she could bring a weapon or support gear, tilting her head cutely, while Tsu mused that the request could mean anything that might help them succeed. As they brainstormed, Habuko noticed some of Izuku's quirk 𝐒𝐮𝐬 next to a pile of metal tubes and wires, sparking an idea. She suggested they talk to the school to clarify what items would be allowed. Her friends smiled back at her, eager to hear her suggestion. On the day of the 𝐒𝐮𝐬 entrance exam, the trio stood at the gates of the school, ready to face the challenges ahead together. The three friends stood before the building, with Izuku lost in thought while his companions looked at him in exasperation. They had grown accustomed to Izuku's tendencies regarding anything related to heroes, but today required their full attention. Tsu and Habuko decided to shake Izuku out of his stupor, but it was Bakugo, with his ash-blonde hair and red eyes, who shoulder-checked Izuku as he passed by. He shouted for Izuku to move, calling him a nerd. Izuku felt a familiar urge to respond defensively, but his newfound confidence and the support of his friends gave him the courage to speak up, albeit with a slight stutter. He acknowledged Bakugo's presence before turning back to his friends. If he could have seen Bakugo's expression, he would have noticed the surprise that quickly turned into a muttered complaint as Bakugo entered the school. Izuku and his friends took a moment to gather their thoughts and ensure they had everything they needed for the exam. Tsu remarked on the importance of their email to the school, which confirmed what items were allowed. Izuku suggested that they could have taken a more daring approach, but the deadpan looks from his friends made him look away, embarrassed. Habuko reminded him of their previous visit when they had turned in their forms, causing Izuku to blush at the memory. A week before the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 entrance exam, Izuku and his friends had received emails requesting them to present the items they intended to use during the exam. This was particularly important for Habuko, but Tsu and Izuku had also requested a few small items. Habuko had asked for a metal tube to serve as a staff and a customized green and black 𝐿TXI mask. After some testing, all items were approved, though Midnight and Powerloader had raised questions about the mask. Midnight examined the mask, curious about its material, while Powerloader inquired about its purpose. Izuku felt a mix of pride and anxiety as they scrutinized the mask he had crafted from his bio-goo. Habuko explained that the mask was designed to help her quirk work on non-organic materials, as her paralyzing stare only affected living beings. After a lengthy explanation, the teachers were about to deny the items when an unexpected voice came through the intercom, approving their requests with a sinister laugh. The teachers exchanged worried glances, realizing the implications of the voice's approval. As the flashback ended, the three friends approached the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 building, just in time for Izuku to trip over a loose brick. Before Tsu or Habuko could react, he was caught by some floating clothes. Confused, Izuku sent out tendrils of his bio-goo to help him regain his balance, allowing the person who had caught him to let go. The floating clothes, belonging to 𝐒𝐬, expressed excitement about Izuku's quirk. Blushing at the attention, Izuku introduced himself and his friends. 𝐒𝐬 enthusiastically greeted them and asked if they were ready for the exam. The group confirmed their readiness and continued into the building, discussing various topics, from quirks to music. Once they reached the briefing area, they had to part ways with their new friend. As they took their seats, they noticed the diverse array of students around them, a clear indication of the competition they would face. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight illuminated the stage as Present Mike prepared to explain the practical exam. 2 weeks after the entrance exam, Izuku waited at a small cafe for his friends and 𝐒𝐬 to arrive. 𝐒𝐬 had quickly exchanged numbers with both Habuko and Izuku after the exam, and she had even started a group chat for the four of them. Lost in thought, Izuku didn't notice 𝐒𝐬 approach until she waved a menu in front of him and playfully touched his hair. Startled, he jumped back, only to realize it was her, arm outstretched, indicating her presence with the bracelets she wore. 𝐒𝐬 giggled before speaking, which only deepened the blush on Izuku's face. She explained that she had tried to get his attention by waving a menu in front of him, but he had been lost in thought. When she poked him, she found his hair to be incredibly fluffy and asked how he achieved that look. As she bounced up and down, waving her arms, Izuku felt his cheeks grow warmer. He apologized, mentioning that he often got lost in his thoughts, and explained that his hair was just naturally like that, all while fiddling with a strand of his own hair, unaware that 𝐒𝐬 had paused in her movements. In her mind, she thought it was unfair that her hair couldn't be like his. At that moment, Tsu and Habuko arrived, observing Izuku playing with his hair and 𝐒𝐬 standing still. They approached her, placing a hand on her shoulders in sympathy. Tsu remarked that 𝐒𝐬 had touched his hair, which prompted an exaggerated nod from her. Habuko reassured her that they had felt the same way after their first encounter with his hair. It just wasn't fair. The three girls stared at Izuku, who continued to mess with his hair. Izuku and his friends enjoyed lunch at the cafe before moving on to other activities for the day. 𝐒𝐬 led them to an arcade, where Izuku and Habuko competed in a racing game while 𝐒𝐮 and 𝐒𝐬 managed to win a few cute plushies from the machines. 𝐒𝐮 then suggested they go to a movie theater to watch a pre-quirk era film called The Meg. The movie was entertaining, but halfway through, Izuku began mumbling about a shark and quirks. Luckily, 𝐒𝐬 quickly fed him some popcorn, bringing his focus back to the screen, though he noticed Habuko had grabbed one of his arms while 𝐒𝐬 leaned close to him on the other side. While he didn't faint, he would admit to himself how close he was to doing so. When it was Habuko's turn to choose, they ended up playing miniature golf at a place themed around the Amazon rainforest. The venue also featured an area where guests could pay to feed parrots and another section with various snakes. Despite being stuck behind slower players on the course, they had fun and took pictures with a trained handler, posing with snakes draped over their shoulders. Izuku was the last to choose their next activity, but he had planned ahead. He took his friends to a hero-themed restaurant hosting a hero trivia competition that night. Initially unsure if it would be enjoyable, they soon found themselves having a great time, especially 𝐒𝐮, who was thrilled to see pro hero 𝐒𝐬 as one of the announcers. The prize for the competition was a day out on 𝐒𝐬's ship with some of his sidekicks, and the winning group could bring their families. This news excited the girls even more. Izuku, being their strongest player with notebooks full of hero trivia, led the charge, while 𝐒𝐮 answered many questions about aquatic heroes, and Habuko and 𝐒𝐬 contributed with answers about their favorite heroes. They won the competition decisively and even got to meet 𝐒𝐬 to arrange a time for their reward. They settled on a date for the following week, allowing everyone to inform their families about who would join the boating trip. The meeting concluded with each of them receiving 𝐒𝐬's autograph before the four teens headed to the train station and then home. Upon arriving home, Izuku was greeted by his mother, who rushed across the floor, calling out his name while waving a letter in her hand. She excitedly announced that his letter from you had arrived. Surprised, Izuku took the letter from her, hugged her, and then went to his room. Sitting at his desk, he heard his phone notify him of a message in the group chat. Checking it, he saw that his friends had also received their letters, prompting him to quickly send a message confirming his own receipt. He then turned his attention back to the unopened letter on his desk, picked it up, and used his quirk to shape a finger into a small dagger to cut it open. As the letter opened, a metal disc fell out, activating to reveal a hologram of All Might. Izuku was so starstruck that he didn't notice the scowl on All Might's face until the men spoke with a tone he had never heard before from the symbol of peace. All Might announced his presence with enthusiasm, introducing himself and revealing the results of the exams. While his words sounded happy and exuberant, his expression remained a scowl. He informed them that they had performed remarkably well on the written exam, scoring a 95, but the practical results were what truly mattered. As All Might gestured to his left, a screen appeared, displaying a multitude of students' names and their various points. He revealed that Izuku had scored an impressive 58 villain points, enough to gain entry into the hero course. However, All Might's demeanor suggested there was more to the story. Izuku noticed the tension in All Might's jaw, which filled him with unease. The rescue points, awarded by a panel of judges, added to their score, and Izuku learned that he had earned a glorious 48 rescue points, bringing his total to 106 points, the highest rank this year. Despite All Might's growing anger, Izuku tried to focus on his results, convincing himself that the hero's frustration was just a figment of his nervous mind. All Might congratulated them and welcomed them to Hero Academia, though it sounded strained. Izuku decided to discuss it with his friends later, planning to show them his hologram to prove his success. He sent a message to his friends, sharing his acceptance and suggesting they meet to show their hologram letters. They all agreed, excitedly discussing their results, though they didn't reveal which class they would be in. When Izuku opened his bedroom door, he found his mother waiting for him. He hugged her tightly, sharing the news of his acceptance. They spent the night celebrating, tears of joy flowing freely. Weeks later, Izuku was walking through the halls of 𝐒𝐮𝐬, searching for his class. He muttered to himself, trying to locate Class 1A, when a hand on his shoulder spun him around. 𝐒𝐬 playfully pointed out that he had just walked past their classroom. Embarrassed, Izuku scratched the back of his head, glancing at 𝐒𝐬, Tsu, and Habuko, who were giggling at his expense. Habuko welcomed him with a side hug, causing both her and Izuku to blush faintly. Tsu reminded them that class could start at any moment, prompting them to enter. As they opened the door, an argument erupted inside. A teen with ash-blonde hair and red eyes lounged at his desk, exchanging heated words with a blue-haired boy wearing glasses. Bakugo's sharp remarks clashed with Ida's calm demeanor as he introduced himself, trying to maintain composure despite Bakugo's provocations. The four friends stood at the door, observing the scene with a mix of exasperation and excitement. While Tsu and Habuko recognized Bakugo and Ida, 𝐒𝐬 had been informed about Bakugo's reputation and the need to keep Izuku away from him. As they stepped into the classroom, Izuku felt a mix of emotions, realizing that he was in a class with both people he had hoped to avoid and all three of his friends. He couldn't tell if the world was against him or in his favor, feeling caught in a neutral space. As they settled in, Izuku's seat turned out to be directly behind Bakugo, much to his friends' dismay. They realized that keeping the two separated would be a challenge in this new environment. Just as Bakugo noticed the group of four, a voice emerged from the ground near the entrance of the classroom, startling everyone. Aizawa, lying in his sleeping bag, looked at the class through the doorway while sipping from a pouch. He introduced himself as their theoretical heroics professor, Aizawa Shoda, and began to move. Aizawa noted that it had taken too long for everyone to quiet down and get in their seats. He stood up from his sleeping bag, retrieving gym uniforms from within it. He instructed the class to take one of the uniforms and head outside, leaving a pile of them on the ground as he walked off. The class remained in a state of confusion for a moment until Izuku noticed Bakugo staring at him, prompting him to quickly grab his gym outfit and toss some to his friends before leaving the classroom. His friends checked the outfits and, finding them correct, hurried after him. It took a few moments longer for the rest of the class to grab their gym outfits and head for the locker rooms, which gave Izuku and his friends just enough time to change and meet their teacher outside. When they arrived, Aizawa acknowledged them with a nod before returning his attention to a timer in his hand while jotting something down on a piece of paper. After a few more minutes, the entire class was outside and dressed in gym outfits, prompting Aizawa to express his dissatisfaction with their tardiness. He stated that if this had been an emergency, only 4 of them would have made it on time, and he expected them to improve their response time for their first heroics lesson. The class groaned or looked sheepish at being called out. Aizawa explained that the reason they were outside was to take a quirk apprehension test. Many students looked confused, but he continued, tossing a ball to Izuku, who clumsily caught it after a few tries. Aizawa asked Izuku about his farthest throw in junior high, to which Izuku replied that he thought it was 80 meters. Aizawa nodded and gestured toward a circle on the ground. Meanwhile, Bakugo seethed at the thought of Deku having a higher score than him, but he smirked, believing the quirkless boy would embarrass himself. Aizawa instructed Izuku to stay inside the circle and use his quirk to throw the ball, allowing anything else to go. Izuku took his place, looking at the ball for a few seconds before nodding to himself. He reared back his arm, transforming it into a goo-like appendage, stretching it as far back as he could before swinging forward with all his might. The ball soared through the air, and after a moment, Aizawa's device beeped, displaying a remarkable distance of 803.49 meters. The display of power excited the entire class. Aizawa explained that the education system often treated everyone the same, which was irrational. They prided themselves on freedom, so they would participate in tests they had done before, but this time using their quirks. The class buzzed with excitement until someone mentioned how fun it would be, prompting Aizawa to glare at them. He then added that whoever came in last place would be expelled. The class reacted with shock and outrage, but Aizawa quickly clarified that life isn't fair, with natural disasters and villains posing real threats. He urged them to show they deserve to be there and to go plus ultra. All the students felt determined to prove their worth, except for one who was distracted, staring at Izuku. Bakugo charged at Izuku, shouting angrily and demanding to know how he achieved that throw. Izuku prepared to create a shield, but before he could, Bakugo found himself wrapped in bandages from Aizawa's capture weapon. Aizawa calmly told Bakugo to stop struggling and not to use his quirk, as it was giving him serious dry eye. Aizawa pulled Bakugo back to him and, before reprimanding him, Izuku spoke up, surprising Aizawa. He recognized Aizawa as Eraserhead, the underground hero who could erase other people's quirks. Aizawa directed Izuku to return to his classmates, and Izuku complied, sensing that Aizawa had the situation under control. Aizawa then warned Bakugo that if he attempted to attack another classmate again, he would be expelled on the spot. Bakugo huffed in response and nodded, at which point Aizawa unraveled his capture scarf and pointed Bakugo back toward the class. Aizawa announced that it was time to start the tests. Class 1A was outside on a training field at U for the quirk apprehension test that their professor had set up to assess their skills. Students were currently going in pairs to perform the 50-meter dash. Tsu had just competed against Ida, achieving a time of 5:58 seconds, while Ida recorded an impressive 3:4 seconds before the next pair took their turn. Tsu's quirk, Frog, allowed her to perform any action a frog could do. As for Tenya Ida, his quirk is Engine, which gives him increased speed thanks to the engines in his calves. A girl with brown hair, Uraraka Achiko, touched her clothes before racing against a blonde-haired boy with a tail, Ojiro Mashireo. Each received different scores, with Uraraka clocking in at 7:15 seconds and Ojiro at 5:49 seconds. Uraraka's quirk, Zero Gravity, allows her to make anything she touches float as if in zero gravity, while Ojiro's quirk, Tail, grants him a strong tail. Next, a sparkling blonde-haired boy, Aoyama Yuga, faced off against a pink-haired girl, Ashido Mina, who was stretching after removing her shoes and socks. Aoyama jumped into the air, shooting a laser that propelled him forward, but it only took him halfway. Meanwhile, Ashido skated along the ground using a special liquid, ultimately passing him. Ashido's quirk, Acid, allows her to create acid from her body at various pH levels and viscosities. Ashido finished with a time of 4:49 seconds, while Aoyama recorded 5:51 seconds. Then came the match between Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo. Although Izuku was not thrilled about the matchup, he decided it was best to get it over with. Bakugo's quirk, Explosion, enables him to sweat a nitroglycerin-like substance from his hands, which he can detonate at will. As they prepared for the 50-meter dash, Bakugo glared at Izuku, who tried to ignore the intense look. Taking a calming breath, Izuku transformed his arms into goo, rearing them back. When the start signal was given, he launched his gooey arms forward, even as Bakugo blasted ahead with an explosion. Izuku felt his tendrils embed in the ground, pulling himself forward and actually passing Bakugo. Izuku finished with a time of 3:55 seconds, while Bakugo recorded 4:13 seconds, which only fueled Bakugo's frustration. The grip strength test followed, and Izuku and his friends overheard other students discussing a tall student named Shoji Mizo, who excelled in this test. Shoji's quirk, Dupli Arms, allows him to have 3 sets of arms, each capable of transforming into different body parts. He achieved an impressive score of 540 kilograms. Izuku created multiple tendrils from his back to wrap around the grip strength machine, squeezing it to a score of 285 kilograms. His friends, while not scoring as high, performed well for those without strength-enhancing quirks. Next was the standing long jump, where Tsuyu Azui managed to leap halfway across the sandbox, while others like Bakugo and Aoyama soared over it. When it was Izuku's turn, he used his tendrils to slingshot himself over the sandbox, barely clearing it. The repeated sidesteps test saw no one perform exceptionally well except for Minoru Mineta, a short boy with purple ball for hair. His quirk, Pop Off, allows him to detach sticky ball from his head and place them elsewhere, where they stick to anything but himself. The ball throw test involved throwing a ball as far as possible using one's quirk. Bakugo was among the first to go, yelling as he threw the ball with explosive force, achieving a distance of 705 2 meters. He was displeased with his score, especially since it was lower than Izuku's, and attempted to demand a second throw, but Aizawa instructed him to return to the rest of the class and stop wasting time. Uraraka followed and surpassed everyone by sending the ball soaring into the sky, earning an infinite score. The distance run was dominated by a tall girl with raven hair tied in a ponytail, who created an electric scooter to ride throughout the test. This was Momo Yaoyorozu, whose quirk, creation, allows her to make any non-living object as long as she knows its atomic structure. The seated toe touches and sit-ups were the final tests, and Izuku performed well alongside Tsuyu, Habuko, and Hagekure. Izuku excelled by transforming his arms into goo to extend beyond his toes for the toe touch and altering his core for the sit-ups. Tsuyu, Habuko, and Hagekure also did well due to their natural flexibility and regular workouts. They had even encouraged Hagekure to join them in physical training after the entrance exam. Once the test concluded, everyone gathered in front of their teacher, Aizawa, who held a device connected to another device pointing at the wall of the building. Aizawa announced that it would take too long to review each student's results individually, so he displayed their total scores and rankings. First Yaoyorozu, Momo 2nd, Todoroki Shoto 3rd, Midoriya Izuku 4th, Bakugo Katsuki 5th, Ida Tenya 6th, Tokoyami Fumikage 7th, Shoji Mizo 8th, Ojiro Mashireo 9th, Kirishima Ijiro 10th, Ashido Mina 11th, Uraraka Achiko 12th, Koda Koji 13th, Habuko Mongoose 14th, Azui Tsuyu 15th, Aoyama Yuga 16th, Siro Hanta 17th, Kaminari Denki 18th, Jiro Kyoka 19th. Hagekure Toru 20th, Mineta Minoru. As the results were revealed, the short boy, Mineta, began to cry and complain about not being able to see the girls in compromising positions and lamented not being a hero who could attract any girl he wanted. Tsuyu, Habuko, and Hagekure moved behind Izuku, placing him between them and Mineta. While Izuku was fine with this arrangement, he grew increasingly frustrated by Mineta's comments. Realizing that most of his friends were girls, he decided to push that thought aside for now, focusing instead on how uncomfortable Mineta was making his friends, which sparked a longing to confront him. Before Izuku could act on his thoughts, Aizawa spoke up. He informed the class that the whole expelling thing was just a logical ruse and instructed them to change and head to homeroom to pick up their schedules. As Aizawa walked away, the entire class was left stunned, except for Mineta, who was celebrating and making even more unsettling comments, prompting Izuku to consider keeping an eye on him. The class made their way back to the locker rooms to change before heading to their homeroom. As Aizawa turned a corner, he called out to someone. He addressed Yagi, also known as All Might, who sheepishly emerged from behind a bush, rubbing the back of his head. Aizawa, in a tired tone, questioned why Yagi had been observing his class from around the corner. All Might explained that he was curious about Aizawa's teaching style and asked for his thoughts on Midoriya. Aizawa stared at All Might incredulously before shaking his head, expressing that he didn't understand why Yagi cared but noted that Midoriya seemed to be a good kid who needed more professional training in using his quirk, just like the other students. Aizawa then warned Yagi to stop stalking his class, giving him a quirk-empowered glare that caused All Might to steam up, revealing a smaller, frail version of himself who coughed. Aizawa chose not to linger and quickly walked away, pondering why All Might was interested in Midoriya. Meanwhile, All Might cleaned the BLD from his chin while reflecting on what he had observed about Midoriya. He thought that someone with such a multifaceted quirk had to be connected in some way to his arch-nemesis. All Might departed, contemplating ways to gather more information on Midoriya. At the front gate of Izuku, Tsu, Habuko, and Hagekure were leaving the school to head to the train station, discussing their thoughts on their new classmates and teacher. It was important to remember that was still a school, albeit a hero school. This was evident to everyone in Class 1A, as the first half of their school day was filled with regular classes like English, Japanese, Math, Science, Hero Art History, and Regular History, followed by lunch before their afternoon classes, which were primarily focused on heroics. Izuku and his classmates were currently waiting for their heroics instructor to begin their first lesson. There were murmurs about who their teacher might be, and while Izuku would usually be excited, his thoughts were clouded by what his friends had confirmed when he showed them his acceptance letter. In a flashback, Izuku was the last of his friends to reveal his hologram acceptance letter. After Tsu, Habuko, and Hagekure had shown theirs, the atmosphere had been upbeat, celebrating the one whose video they had watched. However, Izuku felt a tension in the air due to All Might's demeanor in the video. Tsu, with her blunt nature, was the first to speak up, congratulating Izuku but noting that All Might didn't seem to like him very much. Izuku slumped over, resting his head on the table as he mumbled to himself, expressing his hope that it was just his nerves and anxiety affecting him. Habuko and Hagekure moved to either side of him, offering comfort. Tsu reassured him that they were there for him, while Habuko emphasized that it didn't matter if All Might had a problem with him. What mattered was that he got into you in the first place. Hagekure echoed this sentiment, reminding him that he had achieved the best score in the entrance exam. The girls hugged Izuku, lifting his spirits as they celebrated their acceptance together. Returning to the present, Izuku was pulled from his thoughts by loud footsteps approaching. The door suddenly swung open, revealing a giant muscular man with blonde hair and a blue, red, and white suit, complete with a flowing cape. All Might announced his entrance with enthusiasm, leaning through the doorway as the class cheered. However, he quickly noticed that 4 students, including Midoriya, did not seem as enthusiastic as the others. All Might focused on Midoriya for a moment longer than the rest, trying to discern his connection to his arch-nemesis, before refocusing on the class he needed to teach. Meanwhile, the 3 girls who had not shown excitement were worried about how the class might go for their curly-haired friend, while Izuku contemplated all the ways things could potentially go wrong during this lesson. Everyone in the class's attention was drawn to All Might as he began to speak. He introduced himself as their heroics teacher with a boisterous laugh, announcing that today would be their first practical lesson. He revealed a card that read, Battle Trial, causing an uproar among the students, except for a few. He explained that they couldn't participate in their gym uniforms and quickly activated a remote, revealing suitcases numbered 1 through 20. He instructed the class to change into their hero costumes and meet him at Training Field Beta before rushing out the door, prompting everyone to hurry after him. Izuku and his friends moved a bit slower, feeling less excitement than the rest of their classmates. When they finally arrived at Training Field Beta, they were among the last students to get there. One reason for their delay was Izuku's realization that Hagekure's costume consisted only of shoes and gloves, as her invisibility did not affect clothing. He felt a rush of embarrassment when Hagekure playfully jumped on his back after they exited their locker rooms, and he attempted to catch her legs, only to notice her lack of clothing since he hadn't yet put on his own gloves. This left him flustered, prompting laughter from Hagekure and a croaking sound from Tsu, which Izuku was now convinced was Tsu laughing at him. Meanwhile, Habuko was trying to help Hagekure off of him, giggling at his reaction. Izuku then began brainstorming ideas for a better costume for Hagekure, one that wasn't just gloves and shoes. Hagekure expressed interest in the idea, asking if it would be similar to the eye mask he had made for her during the exam. It was difficult to read her mood with only her gloves and shoes visible, but her tone suggested she was intrigued. Izuku contemplated whether he could create something like that with his quirk, but he remembered that whatever his bio-goo touched, he could feel, smell, taste, and see if he concentrated hard enough. This meant he would have to focus intensely to create a full bodysuit, and even then, it would only last an hour or 2 before needing to merge back with him, requiring constant remaking. The thought made his face turn bright red as he tried to hide it in his hands, releasing Hagekure's legs that were still wrapped around him. Hagekure looked at Izuku in confusion for a moment, wondering what had flustered him until Habuko whispered to her about the eye mask incident. Hagekure's hands instinctively went to her face, and if she were visible, everyone would have seen the blush spreading across her cheeks. This caused her to lose her grip on Izuku's back and fall, but Habuko caught her, giggling at her friend's embarrassment. Inside, Habuko felt relieved that Izuku only needed to make an eye mask for her. She thought it would be embarrassing if he had to create a full suit for her, though she couldn't help but wonder where that thought had come from. This led to her own blush, which Tsu noticed. Tsu remarked that she understood why they were embarrassed but was curious about something else. Habuko quickly covered Tsu's mouth, shushing her while looking away, embarrassed. Tsu teased her, suggesting that she was having inappropriate thoughts, which made Habuko's face turn a deep shade of red. Fortunately, before anyone could notice the three embarrassed teens, All Might had gathered everyone's attention to explain the assignment. In 𝐒𝐻𝐬's office, he was sitting across from All Might, sipping tea. All Might, in his smaller form, held his cup with bony hands, feeling the pressure of 𝐒𝐻𝐬's unblinking gaze. After an hour of silence, All Might began to sweat. 𝐒𝐻𝐬 asked All Might to explain why a few students had approached Izawa about his interactions with a specific student. All Might looked confused, raising an eyebrow and insisting he hadn't had any negative interactions with any students. 𝐒𝐻𝐬 presented evidence, playing a hologram disc that showed All Might appearing angry about the student's acceptance into the school. He then turned his computer monitor around to display security footage of All Might giving suspicious looks toward the student and their friends. All Might's expression darkened as he viewed the footage. 𝐒𝐻𝐬 inquired why All Might seemed to have a problem with Mr. Midoriya, noting that his friends felt compelled to bring it to both his and their homeroom teacher's attention. 𝐒𝐻𝐬 smiled slightly, a gesture that sent a shiver down the spine of the #1 hero. All Might shook off his doubts, but a scowl settled on his face as he stared at 𝐒𝐻𝐬. He expressed his concerns about Midoriya, stating that he didn't trust the boy or the fact that his quirk had been partially active before fully activating 4 years ago. All Might emphasized that partially active quirks had often been used as excuses by the minions of a certain villain when their quirk papers were updated. 𝐒𝐻𝐬 acknowledged this but pointed out that Midoriya had been diagnosed with a partially active quirk at the age of 8, around the same time as his classmates. All Might remained skeptical, insisting that Midoriya must be connected to the villain in some way. 𝐒𝐻𝐬 reassured him that while All Might's concerns were understandable, he had defeated the villain many years ago, and there was no way the villain could have given Midoriya a quirk. He took a sip of his tea before continuing, explaining that the villain could only give already active quirks. All Might pondered 𝐒𝐻𝐬's words in silence. 𝐒𝐻𝐬 then offered to investigate the Midoriya family to ease All Might's worries, adding that several hero graduates who had met Midoriya and his friends described them as good people who aspired to be heroes. All Might conceded that the stress of finding a successor had made him overly paranoid and resolved to focus on his duties as a hero and professor. Meanwhile, Izuku, Tsu, and Habuko arrived outside the school to find a large crowd of reporters blocking the entrance. Habuko questioned why they hadn't moved into the dorms, and Tsu and Izuku explained that it was too expensive and they still needed to help out at home. Habuko wondered how they would get through the crowd, and Izuku suggested looking for another entrance. Tsu noted that even if there was one, it would take too long to walk around the school. The three sighed in unison, preparing to push through the crowd when they noticed a student from the general education course being let through without issue. Seizing the opportunity, they quickly followed suit, pretending to be part of that course, and made it to class just in time to chat with some other students. In Class 1A, the students waited for their first professor of the day, Izawa, who soon entered the room. He informed the class that he had watched the recordings of their battle trials and had feedback for each of them before starting the day. He first addressed Izuku, acknowledging his clever use of distraction to allow his teammate to advance, but advised that they could have taken down a single opponent more effectively together. Izuku nodded in acceptance. Izawa then turned to Bakugo, admonishing him for throwing a tantrum after losing, reminding him that such behavior was unbecoming of a future hero. Bakugo scoffed but nodded in understanding. Izawa continued with Todoroki, emphasizing the importance of teamwork and cautioning against using large attacks in populated areas, as they could cause significant damage. Todoroki acknowledged the advice with a slight nod. Izawa moved on to provide feedback to the rest of the students until everyone had received some form of criticism. Then, Izawa's next announcement sent a wave of tension through the class. He declared that they needed to select a class president, causing the students to relax, realizing it was a normal school activity. Hands shot up, and many students expressed their longing for the position. After a few minutes of excitement, Izawa managed to calm them down, pulling out his sleeping bag and instructing them to complete the voting process before the end of class without disturbing his nap. Eventually, Ida, who had been raising his hand the highest, suggested they vote for the class president, leading to some debate among the students. In the end, they voted, resulting in Izuku being elected as class president, with Yaoyorozu as his vice president. Aizawa, having gotten up from the ground, confirmed the results and mentioned that there would be papers for them to sign later. He then fell back into his sleeping bag as Izuku and Yaoyorozu took their places at the front of the class to address their classmates. The only dissenting voice was Bakugo, who loudly demanded to know who had voted for Izuku. Meanwhile, Izuku was trembling at the front of the class, questioning how he had received 4 votes when he hadn't even voted for himself. It was now lunchtime, and Izuku, along with his friends, was seated at a table as far away from the majority of people as possible. He expressed his confusion about the votes, lamenting his lack of confidence. Tsu, noticing his spiraling thoughts, playfully nudged him to snap him out of it. He thanked her, appreciating the gesture. Tsu continued, explaining that she had voted for him and believed he would do a great job. She added that it would help him with his social anxiety if he interacted with others beyond their small group. Izuku dramatically clutched at his heart and placed his other hand on his head, pretending to be overwhelmed by the betrayal of being moved into the world of extroverts who typically handled class president duties. He leaned closer to Habuko, seeking her reassurance that she wouldn't force him to be social like Tsu was. Habuko remained silent, her expression unreadable to everyone except Tsu and Izuku. This led to a moment of laughter among the trio, which was interrupted when 𝐒𝐬𝐬 pointed out how unusual Izuku's behavior was. 𝐒𝐬𝐬, with exaggerated gestures, expressed her surprise at Izuku's newfound confidence. 𝐒𝐬 and Tokoyami shared their confusion over the sudden shift in their green-haired friend's demeanor. Habuko explained that Izuku only acted this way once he felt comfortable around others. She playfully pushed him away, both of them blushing slightly, though Izuku's embarrassment stemmed from his friends witnessing this side of him. Izuku admitted that he felt safe expressing himself more freely around them. Tsu reassured everyone that they had been caught off guard the first time Izuku had acted like this, especially after his quirk had activated. Izuku insisted that his quirk had nothing to do with it, arguing that the data on quirks affecting personality was unreliable. 𝐒𝐬 humorously questioned whether Izuku was an imposter, noting that he had spoken an entire sentence without stuttering. This drew everyone's attention to Izuku, who began to stumble over his words in response. Habuko confirmed that it was indeed Izuku, explaining that he became more articulate when discussing quirks, although it often led to him mumbling. Tokoyami, in his usual monotone, remarked on the hidden struggles within oneself, which was humorously translated by Dark Shadow. Dark Shadow conveyed that Izuku often wore a mask to shield his true personality from others, only revealing it to his closest friends, and he was glad to be considered one of those friends. 𝐒𝐬 redirected the conversation, assuring Izuku that he would do fine as class president, even better than Ida, who she felt would make things more difficult. Everyone agreed with her sentiment. 𝐒𝐬𝐬 chimed in, suggesting that Izuku could help everyone in class with this position, throwing an arm around his neck and causing him to blush, even as he pouted in protest. Izuku protested that it wasn't fair to use his longing to help others against him, which elicited laughter from his friends. Their light-hearted moment was abruptly interrupted by the sound of an alarm. The intercom announced a Level 3 alarm, instructing everyone to report to their designated meeting locations. The group would have complied if not for the sight of 2 of their friends huddled on the ground, clutching their ears in distress. As the alarm sounded, 𝐒𝐬 and Izuku dropped to the floor, both covering their ears. Izuku's quirk was unpredictably transforming parts of him into goo before solidifying again, the process repeating itself. Tsu, Habuko, 𝐒𝐬𝐬, Tokoyami, and Dark Shadow rushed to their friends' sides, trying to assist them. They struggled until Dark Shadow enveloped 𝐒𝐬 and Izuku, muffling the sound. Once the noise was lessened, the group guided their friends toward the hallway leading out of the cafeteria, only to find it packed with panicking students trying to escape to safety. The group of 6, with Dark Shadow in tow, remained cautious of the crowd, especially with 2 of their friends unable to see where they were going. Just as they were about to decide on their next move, they spotted Ida soaring through the air toward the end of the hall, past the cafeteria entrance. He landed on an exit sign and began shouting to calm the students, explaining that the media outside had managed to breach campus grounds and urging everyone to stop panicking. Students should remain level-headed during crisis situations, Ida reminded the class. The students closest to the windows confirmed his words about the media, and gradually everyone calmed down, helping those who had been hurt in the panic. Izuku took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. He expressed that while he didn't consider himself a good choice for class president, he understood the importance of the role. Acknowledging his earlier incapacitation during the alarm, he proposed that his vice representative take over, suggesting Ida as a co-vice representative for similar situations when either he or Yaoyorozu were unavailable. This surprised Ida, who stood up, while the rest of the class cheered in approval, chanting encouragement for him. Yaoyorozu took charge of organizing the class, with Ida and Izuku joining her at the front to discuss other officer positions that needed to be filled. Aizawa made a small complaint about the additional paperwork but recognized the rationale behind the changes given the earlier incident in the cafeteria. Izuku and his friends explained the situation to Aizawa, inquiring if he had any suggestions for being better prepared for loud noises. He did have some ideas, leading to plans for after-school training sessions to address the issue. As class neared its end, Aizawa stood up to address the students. He informed them that next week, they would participate in a special training exercise at a specialized facility, requiring a bus ride. He advised them to consider whether they wanted to wear their hero costumes for the training. The rest of the day passed quickly, and eventually, everyone went home, unaware that the teachers were investigating a potential problem with one of the gates being damaged and the possibility of an intruder that day. A week had passed since the media break-in at 𝐒𝐮𝐬 University, and Class 1A was in their classroom, speculating about the special training they would undertake that day. The door opened, and their professor entered with a tired expression, causing the class to fall silent. Aizawa noted their quick silence and moved to the front of the class. He revealed a card, announcing that their next trial would be rescue training. He instructed them to change into their hero costumes or gym uniforms if they felt uncomfortable and to meet at the bus in 10 minutes. With that, Aizawa left the excited class, who rushed off to change. Izuku was among the last to arrive at the bus, where he found Yaoyorozu shaking her head with a faint smile as Ida attempted to organize everyone into pairs for boarding. Izuku walked past and glanced into the bus, then turned back to see Yaoyorozu looking at him, her expression suggesting she had tried to warn him. Ida felt a bit disheartened when everyone entered the bus, but both Uraraka and Yaoyorozu comforted him with supportive gestures. Once everyone was on the bus, it started to drive off to their destination, giving everyone plenty of time to talk. Ashido asked Midoriya about his quirk, noting how it made his arms look unusual, similar to her own acidic goop. She was curious about how he could also heal and enhance others' quirks. This question caught everyone's attention, and they paused their conversations to listen to Izuku, who looked around nervously, feeling put on the spot. Izuku explained that his quirk was called bio-goo, which allowed him to create a goo-like substance from the things he ate, storing it for later use. He could also transform parts of himself into goo and create things from it. He smiled as he talked about his quirk, mentioning that the healing aspect was linked to his natural healing factor, which was stimulated by his ability to change into goo and back. This ability could be applied to others, and his capacity to copy and enhance quirks stemmed from how his quirk interacted with biological materials. After his explanation, he noticed that only his best friends, Tsu and Habuko, seemed to understand, until Yaoyorozu nodded in comprehension. Most others stared at him blankly. Izuku wondered if he had started mumbling at some point, and both Habuko and Tsu nodded, prompting a sigh from him. He reiterated that his quirk was versatile and worked easily with biological materials, which finally garnered understanding from the rest of the students. Kirishima chimed in, saying that Izuku's quirk was flashy, making it better than his own hardening quirk. Izuku reassured Kirishima that his quirk was very useful for hero work, as it allowed him to block villain attacks and protect others, which brought a slight smile to Kirishima's face. Kaminari pointed out that if they were talking about flashy quirks, Bakugo and Todoroki had the most impressive ones. While Todoroki remained indifferent, Bakugo puffed out his chest, ready to respond, but Tsu interrupted him, suggesting that Bakugo's personality might hinder his popularity. Izuku braced himself for Bakugo's reaction, and Habuko prepared to intervene, knowing Bakugo's past behavior towards Izuku. Bakugo confronted Tsu, demanding she repeat what she said. Jiro remarked that it was telling how quickly they could all recognize Bakugo's unpleasant personality despite not knowing him for long. Izuku was astonished to see everyone laughing at Bakugo, with some trying to stifle their giggles. The teasing surprised him, as he had come to view Bakugo as just another person rather than someone to idolize, thanks to his therapy sessions. Before the atmosphere could shift further, Aizawa stood up and instructed everyone to quiet down and exit the bus. The students turned to look out the windows, spotting a giant metal and glass dome as the bus pulled up. Upon disembarking, they were greeted by another hero and Professor 13, who waved to the students as they approached. Izuku noticed someone among his classmates having a fan moment, and Habuko snickered, relieved it wasn't him this time. Izuku muttered to himself, dismissing the notion that he was a fanboy. As he looked away, he caught 13 gesturing to Aizawa, who nodded in response. They appeared to be discussing something serious, and Izuku sensed Aizawa's displeasure. Eventually, 13 addressed the class, welcoming them to the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, otherwise known as the Unforeseen Simulation Joint. A collective thought crossed the minds of Class 1A. They had initially thought it referred to Universal Studios Japan. 13 continued, mentioning that she had several things to discuss, struggling to settle on a number before finally stating that everyone was familiar with her quirk, Black Hole. Izuku was the first to respond, recalling how her quirk allowed her to clear debris by skinning it up and turning it to dust, saving thousands in rescue situations. 13 confirmed this but added that her quirk could also be used to harm others, surprising many students. She explained that their quirks could easily hurt others, which was why they were there. During Aizawa's quirk test, they learned their limits, and in All Might's battle trial, they discovered the potential dangers of their quirks when used against others. Now, they would learn how to use their quirks to help and save others without causing harm, reigniting the class's excitement for learning. As the professors led the class into the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐬, they observed various zones around the building, including a shipwreck zone, ruin zone, mountain zone, conflagration zone, storm zone, and more. Aizawa began to explain their training, but Kirishima interrupted, expressing surprise that there would be fake villains present for rescue training. The teachers and students turned to see several figures emerging from smoky black portals, one particularly large portal revealing a face with bloodshot eyes and a severed hand obscuring part of it. As the man stepped through, followed by a hulking figure with an exposed brain, the portal seemed to gain yellow glowing eyes as it shrunk to a more natural size. Aizawa warned everyone to stay back, identifying the intruders as actual villains. He instructed Kaminari to try to contact the school or the police, but Kaminari reported that he couldn't get through, it was all just static. Todoroki pointed out that they must be jamming the signals, while Uraraka wondered why the security system wasn't going off. 13 concluded that someone must be tampering with it since the alarm hadn't sounded yet. Aizawa decided to take action, telling 13 to look after the students and get them out of there while he distracted the villains until backup arrived. He pulled his goggles over his eyes and started toward the stairs. Izuku expressed concern, reminding Aizawa that he was an ambush-type hero focused on one-on-one fights, and this situation was far too dangerous for him to handle alone. Aizawa insisted that a hero couldn't rely on just one trick and urged the students to leave. He glanced back at Izuku and the others before running down the stairs and leaping toward the villains below. Izuku watched in amazement, then had Tsuyu pull him along with her tongue as they all hurried toward the exit. However, they were suddenly stopped by a purple fog that appeared in front of them, forming two yellow glowing eyes that began to speak. The villain apologized for intruding on their bastion of heroics, revealing that they had come for a specific reason, to eliminate All Might, who was running late. The students looked at the villain with a mix of shock and fear, some trying to appear brave despite their terror. The villain continued, stating that they had another job to do, to scatter the students so their companions could end a future generation of heroes. 13 stepped forward, preparing to activate their quirk and instructed everyone to get behind them. 2 boys rushed past 13, each aiming to punch the villain in the face, one of them unleashing an explosion that created a huge smoke cloud, obscuring the villain's form. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 declared that they wouldn't let the villain get away with their plans, while Kirishima echoed that they wouldn't allow any harm to come to anyone. As the smoke cleared, the villain remained unharmed and remarked that they still needed to be cautious, as the students were the golden eggs of this generation. The villain then spread their purple fog forward, enveloping the students in front of them. 13 shouted for the boys to get out of the way, using their quirk to try to absorb the smoke, but soon realized the students had vanished. The villain acknowledged 13's efforts, but pointed out that as a rescue hero, they lacked battlefield awareness. They opened a portal in front of 13 and another behind them, causing 13 to inadvertently use their quirk on themselves, resulting in part of their hero costume disintegrating and causing them to collapse. The students watched in fear as their professor fell, and the villains seized the opportunity to attack, spreading their quirk over the class and opening portals beneath many of the students, declaring that they would scatter and suffer until their demise. Meanwhile, 𝐼 spotted 𝐼𝐼𝐻 about to be attacked by a shark-like villain. Despite her feelings about him, she rushed in to help, delivering a double kick to the villain's face before grabbing 𝐼𝐻𝐻 and swimming toward the surface. Once they surfaced, 𝐼𝐻 quickly found a boat and swam them both to it. However, before they could board, 𝐼𝐻𝐻 made an inappropriate comment about 𝐒𝐻𝐬, causing her to blush and feel upset. In response, she used her tongue to send him up to the deck of the ship, where she climbed up after him. Once on the ship, 𝐒𝐻𝐬 heard a scream and turned to see another classmate falling toward the water. Luckily, they were close enough for her to catch 𝐼𝐻𝐻 with her tongue and reel him in safely onto the ship. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 took a moment to collect himself before realizing where he was and expressing his gratitude to 𝐒𝐻𝐬 for saving him. 𝐒𝐻𝐬 reminded him that they needed to focus on the situation at hand, gesturing to the side of the boat where villains were gathering in the water. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 acknowledged the danger, stepping back from the edge of the ship, while 𝐼𝐻𝐻 panicked, exclaiming that the situation was worse than bad. 𝐒𝐻𝐬 calmed 𝐼𝐻𝐻 down and suggested they come up with a plan to escape. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 insisted they should wait for All Might to arrive and handle the villains instead. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 recalled the unsettling words of the villain shrouded in smoke, who had claimed they were there to eliminate All Might. 𝐒𝐻 expressed her disbelief, questioning whether the villains truly had a means to achieve such a feat. She insisted that they wouldn't have come if they weren't confident in their abilities. The thought of a villain capable of taking down All Might sent 𝐼𝐻𝐻 into a panic, and his classmates shared his fear. 𝐒𝐻 emphasized the urgency of devising a plan to confront the villains before they could take any of them hostage. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 nodded in agreement, while 𝐼𝐻𝐻, trembling with anxiety, chose to remain silent until he heard a plan from one of his classmates. 𝐒𝐻 requested to know their quirks so they could strategize effectively. Both boys confirmed, and they began to explain their abilities and formulate a plan. In the ruin zone, explosions echoed from a partially destroyed building as villains advanced toward the 2 students stationed there. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 and Kirishima fought back to back, taking down the villains surrounding them. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 unleashed small bursts of explosions to close in on his enemies, followed by larger blasts that sent them sprawling and unconscious. Meanwhile, Kirishima charged at several foes, using his quirk to absorb damage until he could deliver powerful punches that knocked them out instantly. Kirishima urged 𝐒𝐻𝐻 to hurry and defeat the villains so they could return to their class and apologize. He grabbed 2 villains by their heads and slammed them together, incapacitating them. 𝐒𝐻𝐻, however, was focused on a specific target, the smoky villain, and sent 2 more enemies flying into a group of others, taking them all down. Kirishima reminded 𝐒𝐻𝐻 of their classmates who might not be prepared for combat, but 𝐒𝐻𝐻 was determined to eliminate the villain's escape route. He swiftly dealt with an approaching villain, knocking them out without even looking. Kirishima, inspired by 𝐒𝐻𝐻's confidence in their classmates, enthusiastically agreed to the plan and rushed to catch up with 𝐒𝐻𝐻, who was already moving toward the exit of the ruin zone. They soon encountered even more villains blocking their path, but 𝐒𝐻𝐻 smirked, ready to charge into the fray. In the mountain zone, Yaoyorozu had just created a machete and handed it to 𝐼𝐻𝐻, who was using sound blasts from her boots to fend off approaching villains. As a few villains circled around them, 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐻 leaped in from the side, using his tail to knock them back. 𝐒𝐬 smiled in appreciation and then deployed a net gun, ensnaring the villains and restricting their movements. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 continued to engage the villains, striking them from behind with his tail before grabbing one and tossing them into a group of others who were too slow to react. 𝐒𝐬 crafted a metal staff for protection and prepared more net canisters for her gun, firing them at the villains that 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and 𝐼𝐻 had subdued. These nets were designed to deliver a shock upon contact, incapacitating the villains while keeping them restrained. The trio managed to hold their ground against the villains, pushing them back as they attempted to charge. 𝐼𝐻 would retreat to 𝐒𝐬 for strategy discussions while 𝐒𝐮𝐬 kept the majority of the villains focused on him. In the conflagration zone, which was filled with artificial fires and fake burning buildings, an unexpected ice age had taken hold in one section. Many villains attempted to free themselves from the ice using their quirks, only to find themselves trapped in an even thicker layer. Their morale plummeted as they faced a single student who seemed unaffected by the chaos around them. Todoroki glided effortlessly on an ice path he generated, sending out waves of ice to freeze his targets. Though typically calm, Todoroki felt anger rise within him as he faced villains who wielded fire, reminiscent of someone he despised. His first wave of ice trapped many of the approaching villains, creating an artificial ice age around him. Spotting the remaining villains who had evaded capture, he swiftly maneuvered behind them and unleashed another wave of ice. Some of the more cunning villains attempted to dodge, while others, overconfident, tried to melt the ice wave, only to find themselves ensnared and unable to move. Todoroki approached the closest villain, speaking in a monotone voice. He explained that even with fire quirks that could provide warmth, they were all trapped in ice, and it would take far too long for them to escape before hypothermia set in. As he drew closer, he released more frost and ice from his body, reiterating that he could reinforce the ice to guarantee frostbite. He demanded to know how they planned to kill All Might. His glare was as cold as the Arctic, directed primarily at the villain in front of him, who instinctively gulped in fear. The villain quickly began to divulge all the information they had. In the downpour zone, Tokoyami and Dark Shadow were battling villains to protect their classmate 𝐒𝐻, who was not much of a fighter. They were being overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers, forcing them back into an alleyway. The darkness around them made Dark Shadow stronger but also harder to control. As villains rushed into the alley, Dark Shadow extended its claws, striking at the villains and leaving deep gouges in the buildings. The villains at the back managed to escape, but those at the front were sent flying, knocked out by the force of the attack. 𝐒𝐻, noticing a villain preparing to drop down on Tokoyami from above, couldn't let his friend be harmed. Despite his timid nature, he rushed forward and struck the villain just before they could land on Tokoyami. The two friends exchanged a brief glance before Tokoyami refocused on Dark Shadow and the approaching villains. This time, 𝐒𝐻 was ready to assist in the fight, even though fear still lingered in his heart. Together, Tokoyami and 𝐒𝐻 charged forward, with Dark Shadow leading the way. Their combined strength allowed them to push through the villains, who fought back desperately. Once they reached the open street, Tokoyami and Dark Shadow engaged the villains while 𝐒𝐻 moved around, helping to take them down as they were thrown to the ground by his friends. Toru Hagakure noticed the smell of antiseptics and disinfectant as she began to wake up. She felt a wave of hunger wash over her, causing discomfort as she opened her eyes, only to be blinded by the bright overhead lights. Groaning, she instinctively raised her arm to shield her eyes and attempted to sit up, feeling a gentle pressure on her back that helped her into a sitting position. Once her eyes adjusted, she realized she was in the infirmary, alone. She looked around, wondering if anyone else was nearby. Just as she began to question her surroundings, the door opened, and footsteps approached. The curtains separating her area from the rest of the infirmary was drawn back, revealing Recovery Girl, who expressed her relief at seeing Toru awake and asked how she felt while replacing one of the 4 bags connected to her. Toru replied that she felt fine, except for her growling stomach, which made her blush. However, knowing she was invisible, she didn't try to hide her embarrassment, though Recovery Girl's laughter only intensified it. Changing the subject, Toru asked about everyone else. Once Recovery Girl finished laughing, she explained that 13 and Izawa had been taken to the hospital with injuries that were serious but less so than they would have been without the help of Toru's friend, who had healed them from significant injuries. Recovery Girl then reviewed a clipboard, noting that Toru's injuries had been the worst, and her friend had used his quirk to heal her to the point of exhaustion. Toru recalled Midoriya trying to heal her before she passed out upon seeing Mongoose, which made her worry for him. As she felt that worry, she also sensed a reassuring presence, as if someone was letting her know they were okay, but she dismissed it and asked Recovery Girl about her friend. Recovery Girl huffed at Toru's question and informed her that they were still there, needing to rest and recover. She then returned with 2 carts filled with various foods that made Toru's mouth water. Recovery Girl encouraged her to help herself, explaining that the food had been chosen to be filling yet easy on the stomach for someone recovering. With her stomach growling again, Toru wasted no time digging into the food. Recovery Girl reminded her to eat slowly to avoid choking, but other than that, Toru was left to enjoy the meal. As she ate, she hardly noticed that she had consumed a significant portion of the food, still feeling hungry, while also sensing that someone else was beginning to feel better as she continued to eat. It took close to an hour, but eventually, Toru finished all the food placed in front of her. This led her to question how she had eaten so much and still felt hungry. 𝐼𝐬 observed her and asked if she was still feeling hungry or needed anything else while running through some basic checkup procedures with Toru. Toru replied that she felt fine but was still hungry. She then inquired about Midori and how long she had been sleeping, noticing that no one else occupied the other infirmary beds. 𝐼𝐬 explained that Toru's lingering hunger was likely a side effect of what had occurred when her friend Midoriya enhanced his healing abilities to heal her completely. She moved to another table to grab something, mentioning that she was about to see if Midoriya could tell them himself, which would also reveal his location. Toru was confused when 𝐼𝐬 held out a notepad and pen toward her, but before she could reach for them, 2 tendrils emerged from behind her and grabbed the items. Turning around, Toru expected to see Midoriya but found nothing there, prompting a confused noise from her. She then looked at the tendrils, which she recognized as Midoriya's. Following the tendrils, she discovered they were coming from her own back, nearly causing her to jump out of bed in an attempt to see what was happening. 𝐼𝐬's voice caught her attention, noting that it was quite the problem but that Toru seemed to be feeling better after her meal, indicating that her quirk's stockpiling effect worked even during quirk exhaustion. 𝐼𝐬 wrote something down on a clipboard and looked up to see an extremely confused Toru, who was craning her neck to get a better view of her back. 𝐼𝐬 gently tapped Toru on the shin with her cane, eliciting a small yip of surprise from Toru as she rubbed her leg. 𝐼𝐬 pointed out that the tendrils were the answer to where Midori was, which only confused Toru further. She expressed her bewilderment about seeing the tendrils but not understanding where Midori was or why they were coming from her back. 𝐼𝐬 explained that Toru had passed out before Midoriya could put his plan into action. She posed a question about what Midoriya's quirk doctor advised him never to do. When Toru tilted her head and responded with a no, 𝐼𝐬 nodded and elaborated that his quirk doctor warned him never to transform his entire body into a goo form. However, his quirk worked better the more goo he had stored, especially when it came to healing. The more goo in contact with the person being healed, the stronger and faster the healing would be. Toru realized that Midoriya had turned his whole body into goo, which made sense, but she was still puzzled about why his tendrils were emerging from her back or why she was experiencing different emotions. 𝐼𝐬 noted that it was good to know Toru could feel Midoriya's emotions and explained that his tendrils were coming from her back because they were inside her body from when he was healing her. This new application of his quirk intrigued Toru, and just as she was about to ask more, she felt another emotion, an equally curious feeling, arise from the back of her mind. Toru tried to focus on the curious feeling she experienced, faintly hearing Midoriya's voice as he attempted to analyze the new application of his quirk. This brought a giggle from Toru, catching 𝐼𝐬's attention. 𝐼𝐬 looked at Toru, her expression indicating that she did not find the situation amusing. Toru explained that she felt an emotion that wasn't hers, and when she concentrated on it, she could hear Midoriya mumbling about his quirk, which made her laugh. She waved her arms exaggeratedly as she spoke. 𝐼𝐬, noticing Toru's amusement, smiled and said that it was good to hear she could hear him, as it would make communication easier once Midoriya regained his strength. She then began to explain what she suspected about the nature of his quirk. This piqued the interest of both Toru and Midoriya, though 𝐼𝐸 could only tell that Toru was listening intently. 𝐼𝐸 explained that she had taken a sample from Midoriya's tendril and some blood from Toru to investigate any side effects. She discovered that Midoriya had essentially integrated himself into Toru's body in a way that resembled mutual symbiosis. Noticing Toru's confusion, 𝐼𝐸 decided to use a different analogy, referencing an ancient movie about clownfish and their relationship with sea anemones. She explained that the anemone provides a home and protection for the clownfish, while the clownfish help keep pests away and provide nutrients. With this analogy, Toru began to understand, while Midoriya pondered how his quirk could function in such a manner. 𝐼𝐸 then addressed Midoriya directly, confirming that his quirk's multiple capabilities made sense when viewed as a symbiotic relationship. She elaborated on how his powers allowed him to heal and enhance quirks, providing benefits to his host. 𝐼𝐸 flipped through some papers, explaining that his copying ability was complex, but his creation power, combined with his ability to manipulate his slime form, enabled him to protect his host by creating tendrils or weapons. Toru was puzzled about the suit 𝐼𝐸 mentioned but grasped the rest of the explanation. Midoriya seemed to agree with 𝐼𝐸's insights, but she continued. 𝐼𝐸 pointed out that while their relationship was mutual, Toru would need to eat more than usual due to the symbiotic nature of their connection, while she provided Midoriya with a safe place within her body. Toru acknowledged that this made sense and sensed that Midoriya wanted to ask if there was a way to revert him to a more human shape. 𝐼𝐸 confirmed that they would need to conduct tests, noting that it was possible this new form was meant to be his true state. Even if they had Izuku erase his quirk, there was a chance he wouldn't revert. However, she assured them that training could help, and they would be in a training facility for the next few days to see if Midoriya could return to his original form while being monitored on campus. 𝐼𝐸 noticed Toru was about to ask something but quickly interjected, informing them that they had been asleep for quite some time, and their parents, along with Ms. Midoriya, had already been informed of their situation. This news relaxed both Toru and Midoriya, although they still had many questions, particularly Midoriya, who was eager to inquire further. Their questions were interrupted when the door to the infirmary opened, revealing Nizu, the president of 𝐒𝐮𝐬 University. He hopped onto a stool near 𝐼𝐸's desk and began speaking before anyone could respond. Nizu informed them that everything 𝐼𝐸 had discussed had already been communicated to the rest of the university staff and a few other members. Toru, curious, asked how long they had been asleep, noting that it was now night. She also mentioned that Midoriya wanted to know if there was anything else they hadn't been told. Nizu confirmed that classes had been cancelled for the next few days and that they had been out long enough for it to be 11:30. He suggested they rest after having another meal, given their increased appetite. With a click of a button, 2 robots entered, pushing carts piled with food. Nizu encouraged them to eat and mentioned that while he recommended they stay in the infirmary, Toru had a dorm on campus. Hagakure learned that if 𝐼𝐸 allowed it, she and Midoriya could return to their dorms for the night, but they needed to be up early as a detective required their statements regarding the events that occurred at the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐬. Nizu smiled at the students as they waited for any questions. Toru turned to 𝐼𝐸 while taking a plate to begin eating and asked if she could head back to her dorm room that night or if they needed to stay. 𝐼𝐸 sighed and rubbed the bridge of her nose before looking at Toru and said that they needed to get her some clothes first before she walked across campus in the middle of the night. Toru looked confused and pointed out that she was invisible, so no one would see her when she walked back. 𝐼𝐸 and Nizu realized they had forgotten to mention that Toru had been visible the whole time. 𝐼𝐸 moved and pulled out a handheld mirror from a drawer, handing it to Toru, who gasped in surprise as she looked into it. She saw a girl with chartreuse and pink hair down to her shoulders and big teal and yellow eyes with long eyelashes on a pale complexion. Toru stared into the mirror for a few moments until she realized her visibility, letting out a high-pitched squeal of excitement. Izuku was trying to sleep, struggling not to think about his current state, but his analytical mind kept returning to the warning his quirk doctor had given him the day after his quirk appeared. The only thing keeping him from panicking was the memory of how ignoring his doctor's warning had allowed him to save his friend Toru's life, who had recently expressed a longing for him to call her by her name. In a flashback, Toru had dressed in a 𝐒𝐼𝐬 outfit after finishing the 2 carts piled with food that Nizu had given her. She was currently on her way back to the highest alliance dorm building. Izuku could only watch through Toru's eyes as she made her way back to her dorm room for the night, unable to speak to her without her actively focusing on his emotions. 𝐼𝐬 believed this was due to quirk exhaustion and that he would be able to communicate with 𝐒𝐬 tomorrow without her needing to focus on him. Izuku was pulled from his thoughts when he noticed 𝐒𝐬 enter a building and head up some steps. Moments later, she reached her room. 𝐒𝐬's room was quite pink, with cherry-patterned blinds blocking the view of the balcony and a bed adorned with pink sheets and pillows. Stuffed animals and pillows were scattered across her bed, which was on the right side of the room, with her dresser across from it and her desk next to the dresser, closer to the balcony than the door. As 𝐒𝐬 was about to change into her pajamas, she paused and spoke, expressing her concern about whether Izuku could see outside of her. She asked him not to look while she changed. Izuku tried to communicate that he had not seen anything the first time and had figured out how to close his own eyes, but he heard her giggle, which turned into laughter. 𝐒𝐬 apologized for teasing him, saying she could sense his embarrassment and could hear most of what he said. She admitted she wasn't used to anyone being able to see her. Izuku reassured her that he wasn't looking, which she acknowledged. A few minutes later, after getting dressed for bed, 𝐒𝐬 suggested they talk for a bit before going to sleep, mentioning the events of the day. Izuku felt her various emotions and tried to convey the comfort and reassurance he wanted to give her, recalling something important. Izuku extended a tendril and wrapped it around 𝐒𝐬 in a pseudo-hug, trying his best to make it as reassuring as possible, which elicited a giggle from her. She expressed her gratitude, saying she really needed to talk about what had happened. Sitting on her bed with trembling hands, Izuku summoned another tendril to wrap around one of her hands in a comforting gesture. 𝐒𝐬 shared how inspired she felt when he rushed out to save Professor Aizawa, Tsuyu, Kaminari, and Mineta, but her heart sank when he was caught by that Nomu creature. As she began to cry, Izuku sent calming feelings her way and gently wiped away her tears with the end of one of his tendrils. After a moment, she managed to continue, describing how terrifying it was to witness one of her friends in danger, even if she later learned he had faked losing his arm. Despite the fear, it motivated her to take action and help him. Izuku wished he could convey how much he appreciated her longing to assist him, and he sensed that his feelings were reaching her, as she appeared a bit happier. 𝐒𝐬 recounted her attempt to knock out the villain, only to be met with pain and fear for her life. Izuku tightened his pseudo-hug to reassure her as she calmed down. She recalled how All Might had brought her to him after she called out his name, and how she had tried to heal him even as the villain's quirk spread. Izuku felt a bit embarrassed that she remembered him calling her by her first name during such a chaotic moment. She acknowledged that the heroes were nowhere near in time to help, even as she passed out before he transformed his body to heal her. Izuku noticed how much 𝐒𝐬 was trembling and focused all his energy on making her hear his voice. He reassured her that she was his friend and he would have done anything to save her again, emphasizing that a hero saves anyone they can, even at their own risk. Although he wasn't sure if those were the right words, he could see that 𝐒𝐬 seemed happier now, which was what mattered. 𝐒𝐬 thanked him, expressing her need for that reassurance and asking if she could call him Izuku. He felt a wave of embarrassment at the thought of a girl, other than Tsuyu or Habuko, using his first name, but he confirmed it with a tendril mimicking a thumbs up. She reciprocated by saying she would also like him to call her Toru. For a fleeting moment, he sensed her embarrassment, but it quickly faded. After giving another pseudo-thumbs up, he retracted his tendrils as Toru settled under her covers, ready for bed. Toru expressed her gratitude again, assuring him that she didn't mind him being there and that the teachers would figure something out soon. She eventually fell asleep, leaving Izuku to reflect on her words. He managed to drift off as he realized one of his friends accepted him in this new form, holding on to the hope that his professors would help him regain his original self. His last thought before sleep enveloped him was that this situation might not be the worst, as it allowed him to stay close to one of his friends. Toru woke up in her bed with half-lidded eyes, stretching her stiff muscles before surveying her room. Not noticing anything unusual, she sat on the edge of her bed, yawning as she prepared to get up. Suddenly, Izuku greeted her, and she let out a startled scream, losing her balance. Izuku quickly extended 2 tendrils from her back to steady her, allowing her to regain her footing before retracting them. Izuku felt Toru stirring, waking him from his slumber. It took him a moment to remember the events of the previous day and where he was. When he greeted her, it startled her, causing her to scream and fully awaken him from his groggy state. She apologized, laughing sheepishly, and he reassured her that it was no problem, admitting it took him a moment to realize where he was. Toru felt a bit guilty for startling her friend first thing in the morning. She was about to reassure Ishido that everything was fine when a series of knocks echoed from her door, followed by a voice from the other side. Ishido called out, asking if everything was okay, and Uraraka chimed in, confirming her concern. Toru felt uncertain about how they would react to her newfound visibility, but Izuku reassured her that they had already seen her. This helped calm her nerves as she approached the door. When Toru opened the door, she saw Ishido in vibrant purple and black cheetah print pajamas, standing next to Uraraka, who wore a baggy t-shirt that barely revealed her pink shorts. Izuku, having been in similar situations before, found it amusing but also realized he hadn't interacted much with his classmates outside of his close friends. He was grateful yet slightly frustrated that his vision was limited to what Toru could see, as she was accustomed to being invisible and casually looked over the girls. Toru complimented Ishido on her cute pajamas, which caught the girls' attention. They stared for a moment before Ishido exclaimed how amazing it was that Toru was visible, clapping her hands together and leaning in for a closer look. Uraraka stood by, smiling and offering her own compliments. Eventually, Uraraka redirected the conversation, asking why Toru had screamed earlier. Toru felt put on the spot, unsure how to explain her situation. However, since Izuku had already informed others about her visibility, she decided to invite them into her room to share what had happened after she woke up in the nurse's office. Both girls were surprised to learn that Izuku had been there too, and Ishido gasped as she pulled out her phone to show them a comic character whose powers reminded her of Izuku's quirk. She explained that the character's abilities came from an alien creature that enhanced the host's natural abilities. Uraraka and Toru exchanged surprised glances, while Izuku felt a sense of camaraderie with Ishido, realizing they both enjoyed comics, even if he hadn't heard of the one she mentioned. Ishido, noticing their reactions, blushed and looked away, prompting Uraraka to stifle a laugh, which made Toru giggle as well. Ishido crossed her arms, pouting slightly, while Uraraka apologized for her reaction, surprised that Ishido was a fan of comics. Ishido clarified that she only liked certain ones, particularly those involving aliens, and went on to explain the movies she was referencing. She then turned to Izuku, asking if he knew the films. Izuku hadn't seen them but felt a bit out of place as he listened to the girls' chat. As the conversation continued, Ishido asked Toru if Izuku had seen the movies. Before Toru could respond, Uraraka gasped and pointed to Toru's shoulder. Toru looked over to see black and green slime forming there, rising up and shaping into a head with white eyes and sharp teeth, tendrils curling like hair. The creature began to make gurgling sounds, gradually forming words as it adjusted to its new form. Izuku observed the transformation, intrigued by the unexpected turn of events. Izuku expressed his interest in watching some movies that Ishido had mentioned, noting how intriguing they sounded after her explanation. Although his voice came from a head made of goo, it was unmistakably Izuku's. He thanked Ishido for sharing a comic, admitting he likely wouldn't have thought to try it otherwise. Uraraka felt uncertain about the sight of another head resting on one of her classmates' shoulders, but Ishido found it fascinating. Meanwhile, Toru playfully poked Izuku's face, giggling as he attempted to ignore her antics. Friends engaged in conversation for about an hour before deciding to head downstairs for breakfast. Downstairs in the 𝐒𝐮𝐬 Alliance building, Izuku remained hidden within Toru, not wanting to alarm any classmates who were unaware of the unusual situation. He chose to observe through Toru's eyes while forming his head to eat. Upon arriving downstairs, they spotted some classmates, including Jiro, 𝐒𝐮𝐬, 𝐒𝐮𝐬, and Shoji, already preparing their breakfasts. Just as Toru was about to grab her meal, a knock at the dorm building door silenced everyone. It took a second knock to prompt Shoji, the closest to the door, to answer. On the other side stood Midnight, their hero art history professor, who immediately locked eyes with Toru and, by extension, Izuku. Midnight requested Toru to accompany her, and Jiro and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 exchanged glances, surprised to see the invisible girl now visible. Toru looked back at her friends, who encouraged her to go, and she moved towards Midnight. As they left, the noise of conversation erupted once more. Midnight explained that 𝐒𝐮𝐬 had instructed her to take them to another building for breakfast and to discuss how to restore Izuku to his previous state, as well as to assess how this situation affected Toru's quirk. She added that they had guests waiting to see them. Midnight's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the gooey head resembling Izuku, but she composed herself. Izuku apologized for the unusual appearance, believing it was best to inform her now. Toru agreed, mentioning how it had startled Uraraka earlier. The trio continued toward the main building, heading to a room near the faculty area to meet their guests. In the meeting room, Inko greeted the 𝐒𝐬𝐬, expressing her familiarity with their daughter from the entrance exam. She extended her hand to 𝐼𝐚, who returned the handshake. 𝐼𝐚 introduced herself and her husband, 𝐒𝐻𝐬, who had short chartreuse hair and a scruffy beard, dressed in a brown suit. As they conversed about what 𝐒𝐮𝐬 had shared regarding their children, 𝐒𝐻𝐬 voiced his curiosity about why only the three of them were summoned. 𝐼𝐚 reassured him that it was likely nothing serious, especially since 𝐒𝐮𝐬 had mentioned that their son had saved their daughter's life. Inko added that there was also a new aspect of Izuku's quirk that had been discovered, which might be related to the meeting. Before they could delve deeper into the conversation, a knock at the door drew everyone's attention. Midnight entered, followed by robots pushing 2 carts piled with food. She took a seat as the robots placed the carts against the back wall before departing. Midnight greeted Inko and the 𝐒𝐬𝐬, explaining that she was conducting the meeting in place of Aizawa, who was currently in the hospital. She informed them that the incident involving Izuku's quirk had affected both him and Toru in different ways, none of which were particularly negative, especially for Toru. Midnight gestured for 𝐒𝐬𝐬 to enter the room before any questions could arise. Toru waved at her parents as she entered, prompting them to sit up straighter in shock. 𝐼𝐚's eyes filled with tears at the sight of her daughter, while 𝐒𝐻𝐬 also felt emotional as he slowly approached Toru, who embraced him. She suggested they take a picture while she was in this form, smiling as she leaned out of the hug to give her father space to see her properly. 𝐒𝐻𝐬 had not seen his daughter since the day before her 8th birthday. He held her at arm's length, trying to take in every detail of her. 𝐼𝐚 approached and pulled her daughter into a hug, then stepped back to examine her. 𝐼𝐚 commented on how Toru's quirk was a mutation and expressed her confusion about how this was possible. 𝐒𝐻𝐬 interjected, mentioning that Ms. Midoriya's son was supposed to accompany Toru, and he wanted to meet him to understand how he had made her visible. Inko, who had been watching the emotional moment, approached and asked where her son was. Toru began to step back towards Midnight, leaving her parents and Inko puzzled. Toru explained that he was there already, just not in the way they might expect. Suddenly, a blob of green and black goo formed on Toru's shoulder, shaping itself into a head. Izuku greeted everyone, trying to bow in his current form, but Inko rushed toward the 2 university students, expressing her concern about what had happened to her son. Once everyone calmed down, Izuku and Toru were allowed to eat breakfast while they explained, with Midnight's help, how they had come to be in this situation and what they had learned about Toru's visibility and Izuku's ability to bond with another person. A few hours later, they found themselves in a training gym on campus. Inko and Toru's parents were worried for various reasons, but Midnight had managed to reassure them and explain how they planned to handle the situation. Izuku and Toru waited in the gym alongside Midnight for additional faculty members to join them. Just as Toru was about to ask how much longer they needed to wait, the gym doors opened, revealing 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and 𝐼𝐴, with Cementos pushing a cart full of equipment behind them. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 greeted the students and explained that they would be assessing how Izuku's symbiotic bond with Toru had affected their quirks and physical capabilities. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 began placing sensors on Toru in various locations to gather data while they performed a series of exercises, both with and without their quirks. Izuku formed a head out of goo to communicate, surprising those who had not seen him do this before. He asked how he would perform the non-quirk exercises. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 acknowledged the question and praised Izuku for finding a way to speak outside of Toru's voice. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 noted that they were receiving signals from Izuku's quirk when he created his head, but they would see how he could reform his body during the physical tests. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 mentioned that Symbiote would transform the gym into different environments to test both of them and create targets for them to engage with. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 then asked Toru to activate her quirk. Toru struggled initially, showing her frustration, but 𝐼𝐬𝐬 reassured her that it was normal for a mutation type. After about 20 minutes of effort, Toru finally succeeded in becoming invisible again, except for her clothes. To everyone's surprise, the goo that Izuku had shaped into a head also became invisible. Toru celebrated her success, but then unexpectedly, 2 beams of light shot from where her hands were, hitting the ceiling with a loud bang. Everyone looked up to see scorch marks and a slight dent in the metal roof. Toru questioned if she had caused that. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 asked 𝐼𝐬𝐬 for the sensor readings, which indicated normal energy levels for her basic invisibility. However, when she shot the beams, her quirk energy signature had gained a boost, synchronizing with Izuku's quirk energy level. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 praised the results and asked Toru to deactivate her quirk so they could focus on Izuku. Toru quickly became visible again, and the attention shifted to Izuku, who was instructed to extend as many tendrils as possible, either transforming some into weapons or creating different shapes. He managed to bring out 8 tendrils but had to retract his head to achieve that number while also completing the tasks they had set for him. Izuku was then asked to copy Midnight's quirk to see if he could still do so while bonded to someone, leading to an intriguing situation. As Izuku copied Midnight's quirk, he felt the rush of energy he normally experienced from his copy quirk, but he wasn't the only one affected. Toru let out a squeak, feeling as if a static charge had surged through her body. She remarked that it felt strange. Before anyone could inquire further, Toru began to release the same kind of gas Midnight produced when using her quirk. Izuku quickly explained that he wasn't using her quirk and that Toru needed to concentrate to control it. With Midnight and Izuku guiding her, Toru focused on stopping the gas, and after a few minutes, she succeeded. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 observed the situation with fascination, noting that any quirk Izuku copied also seemed to be accessible to the person he bonded with. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 added that the sensors indicated another quirk signature was being integrated into Izuku's own, but it was surprising that Toru did not receive that signature. Instead, her quirk synchronized with Izuku's to activate when she used it. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 then asked Izuku if he could form a suit around Toru's body, and he agreed, albeit with some embarrassment. Toru felt strange at first as the suit enveloped her, but it was also comforting and invigorating, making her feel lighter and more agile. Once the process was complete, Toru went to the changing room to remove her gym clothes, leaving her feeling exposed, as Izuku was essentially the only clothing she had on at that moment. The suit Izuku created for her was a skin-tight green and black full-body suit that gradually changed colors to match Toru's hair, with chartreuse and pink as the main colors and black and green as subtle accents. The mask of the suit concealed her face with prismatic imagery, featuring large white almond-shaped areas where her eyes were meant to be. Midnight was the first to notice Izuku and Toru, commenting on how well Izuku had emphasized Toru's charm with the suit. Both students felt a wave of embarrassment wash over them. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 playfully scolded Midnight and urged the pair to run the obstacle course that Symbiote had set up earlier. Toru and Izuku prepared themselves for the challenge, discussing their strategy through their thoughts as 𝐒𝐮𝐬 signaled for them to begin. They took off toward the first obstacle, ready to tackle whatever lay ahead.